Uh, Hello.
Yes, doctor. Yes.
Yeah. It's almost time. You can just go ahead because even if my picture does not appear, I can carry on with my presentation with my PowerPoint. So
Okay.
since we have already reached time, I am trying here to work in another laptop.
Okay,
So
fine.
it should not be a problem.
Then
Okay.
we are beginning.
You just put up my poster in my screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning and welcome to you all. I am Father Bimal Lakra, the Vice Principal and PRO of Don Bosco College, Golaghat, and the moderator of the second day of the 2 days international webinar on the topic Politics of Tribal Exploitation in Northeast India, an Unexplored Slice of Paradise. The webinar is organized by the Departments of Political Science and Sociology, along with IQAC Don Bosco College, Golaghat, in collaboration with Northeastern Social Research Center, Guwahati. Yesterday, we were all warmly and enthusiastically welcomed by Father Dr. Jose Paleli SDB, the founder principal and the driving force of all that happens in hosting college Don Bosco Golaghat. This was followed by the introductory speech of the chairperson of yesterday's session, Father Dr. Melvin Pereira from Northeastern Social Research Center, Guwahati, the co-host of the webinar. Then we were ushered into the topic by insightful and deeply analytical keynote address by Dr. Lucas P. Jacob, HOD, Department of Social Work, Assam Don Bosco University, Tapesia Campus, Kamarkuchi, Sonapur. Two topics were covered yesterday. The first was on land alienation among tribals, issues and challenges by Reverend Dr. Walter Fernandez, founder director of Northeastern Social Research Center, Guwahati. The second topic covered was unfolding history, journey from aboriginals to strugglers by Dr. Chandan Kumar Sharma, Department of History, Dibrugarh University. Today, we shall be having another two sessions. The first one, which happens to be the third session of the webinar, will be on the topic Shared Sovereignty and Naga Political Process by Dr. Phyobenthung, HOD, Department of Political Science, Fazl Ali College, Mokokchung, Nagaland. This session will last up to 11:45. After which, the second session will begin on the very hot and current topic, impact of CAA in Indigenous identity, claims and contentions by Dr. Kaustabh Deka, Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University. This session will last up to 1:15 p.m. Valedictory function will conclude the 2 days international webinar, which will be held between 1:15 and 1:30. The valedictory function will be conducted by Sister Dr. Sheila Paul, CSJB, IQAC Coordinator, Don Bosco College, Golaghat. Webinar will officially come to an end at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. Before we begin the session of the day, the organizers would like the following to be announced to all the honored and esteemed participants. Number one, kindly use the Q&A box, that is, question and answer box, to type or post your questions to the resource persons. Number two, the feedback form will be available in the chat box during the last hour of the webinar. Third, the webinar is also available in the YouTube channel of Don Bosco Golaghat. Let us then right away start with the first topic of the day. And may I request Madam Rini Sharma, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Don Bosco College, Golaghat, to introduce to us the resource person of the session. Rini Sharma, over to you.
Thank you, Father. Good morning, everyone. I, Rimi Sharma, take the privilege to introduce our speaker for today's session, Dr. Phyobenthung, who is going to speak on shared sovereignty and Naga political process. Dr. Phyobenthung is the head of Political Science Department, Fazl Ali College, Mukoksung, Nagaland. He has been teaching in this college for the last 14 years. He has published papers in various journals and books on the subject matter of conflict resolution, election, and federalism. His columns have regularly appeared in local dailies. With this, I welcome you, sir. We are very glad to have you among us. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Rimi, for introducing the resource person to us. And now the session is open to Dr. Phyobenthung. Dr. Phyobenthung, kindly take over the session. Thank you. Hello, Dr. Phyobenthung.
Yeah, the video is horrible.
Okay, welcome back. We can see you, doctor.
Okay.
Yes.
Just a second.
Yeah, most welcome. Yes, we can see the slides.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, doctor. Welcome, most welcome.
Yeah. I first of all thank the organizer, the Department of Political Science and Sociology, Don Bosco College, Golaghat, and Northeast Social Research Center, Guwahati, for inviting me to this international webinar. As given in the brochure, my topic is shared sovereignty and Naga peace process. So let me go straight to my presentation without delaying it. The Naga peace process has been continuing for the last 23 years, and it seems the negotiation has reached a stalemate where both the negotiating parties are not willing to budge their stand for and against the separate flag and constitution. As accepted by the Indian government, the uniqueness of the Nagas, a unique solution is required, lest we see history repeating again. Naga political struggle have haunted both the conflicting parties for decades. Many attempts were made to bring the issue to its logical conclusion. However, in all these attempts, one finds that there was an attempt by the Indian state to play the role of a big brother. If you look at in 1947, the 9 points agreement was unilaterally scrapped by India after signing because of the interpretation of the last point of the agreement, which was construed as a disadvantage for the Indian state. Similarly, the 16-point agreement that led to the formation of present state, Nagaland, was a strategy to divide the Nagas by co-opting the moderate element of the Nagas, thereby leaving out the real stakeholders, that is the nationalist section. Likewise, similar policy was made in 1975 Shillong Accord. This has only generated mutual suspicion between the conflicting parties, ultimately leading the issue to more and more complications. Experience suggests that in this kind of nationalist conflict, when the extremist sections are left out of negotiation, the conflict is not likely resolved because they are the real stakeholder exposing the cause, quote unquote. Fortunately, in the ongoing peace process, almost all the extremist groups are engaged in the dialogue, which in itself is a big achievement, given that the nationalist groups are often divided in approach and strategy. Both India and the Naga nationalist groups cannot afford to let this opportunity go without striking a deal for settlement. This presentation is an attempt to understand the idea of shared sovereignty based on the framework agreement signed on 3rd August 2015 as an ideal solution for the protracted Indo-Naga conflict. Just a second, I want to share my PowerPoint. Yeah. Uh, Yeah, in today's presentation, I have structured my presentation in three main headings. That is, the first is objective, and here I am going to look at the idea of shared sovereignty and how can this help in the settlement of the long-standing India-Naga political problem. And here, for this, I have taken a hypothesis that is shared sovereignty is a workable proposal for conflict resolution in multi-ethnic political problem. The third is the approach. In my approach, I have tried to understand the concept of shared sovereignty and also shared sovereignty in the Naga peace process. Here I will be looking at the brief history of the Naga struggle and the shared sovereignty in the context of the Nagas. Finally, I will be looking at the challenges. There are many, but I would be dwelling particularly on two issues. That is the territorial integrity and the territorial integrity and pan-Naga Hoho, and the second would be the separate flag and the constitution. So firstly, the concept of shared sovereignty. Sovereignty is derived from Latin word superinus, which means supreme. John Bodden introduced the concept of sovereignty in modern times and defined it as the absolute and perpetual commanding power of the state, as the supreme power over citizens and subjects unrestrained by law. This classical understanding of sovereignty believes in absoluteness, permanence, universality, inalienability, and indivisibility of state. Therefore, legally speaking, sovereignty is the supreme authority of the state. However, in practice, this classical understanding faces many challenges, as sovereignty has to share its authority with the family, church, union, and local governments. Sovereignty is also forced to accommodate and recognize from the conscientious objectors. According to the pluralist understanding, sovereignty can never be allowed to become absolute and irresponsible. Pluralists also argued that internally, sovereignty has to justify the exercise of its special power. Sovereignty is also limited by country's constitution and cannot overstep its authority. Externally, it is limited by international law, conventions, and practices. In short, there is no such thing as absolute sovereignty. Rather, sovereignty is always shared by various agencies, various organizations within and outside the state. The classical understanding of sovereignty, which was in vogue till 20th century, is now seen receding with the coming of globalization. In addition to the forces of globalization, the understanding of sovereignty as an absolute and exclusive power from both internal and external actor has been violated many times in the history. Stephen D. Krasner mentioned 4 ways by which these violations occurred, such as convention, contract, coercion, and imposition. Even in today's world, we find several instances where sovereignty is shared externally through contract between 2 or more entities, and internally through various forms of division of powers, such as federation, autonomy, etc. Shared sovereignty would mean different things to different people depending on what context one uses. In the context of international legal sovereignty, it would mean ceding certain power to some party, bilateral, regional, multilateral, through voluntary participation for mutual gain. For example, the United Nations organizations, the European Union, the World Trade Organizations, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, etc. Here, sovereign states voluntarily participate to be a member of these organizations. This participation entails them to share some of their sovereign power to the supra-sovereign body. For example, acceptance of international law as a governing principle by the member state as one. Similarly, NATO has power to make decisions with regard to the member nations in certain aspect, because the members voluntarily share their power with this organization. The same idea of shared sovereignty also happened between 2 sovereign states. For example, the trade and border management, trade relations and border management between 2 sovereign states, etc. This belief is according to the monistic understanding of sovereignty. The second type of sovereignty is to divide and share the sovereign power between and among different units within the state, such as minority group, nationalist organization, etc. Here, the power sharing is done by way of bilateral treaty, exemplified by the Russian Federation. Autonomy is exemplified by Hong Kong and Macau. Different kinds of federal arrangement ranging from confederation to consociational democracy as exemplified by Switzerland. Asymmetry and segmented federalism, again, exemplified by the Russian Federation, etc. In this type of shared sovereignty, one sovereign is shared between 2 or more entities. This forms the pluralist understanding of sovereignty, which believes in divisibility of sovereignty. Now, many scholars have established the fact that the federal model strategy is the best form of government in multi-ethnic, multinational state, because this system provides the necessary space for developing, safeguarding, and preserving the ethnic group's identity. Not only that, it also safeguards the resources and the system as a whole. The degree of power sharing may vary from state to state. For instance, the Russian Federation allows some of its republics to enjoy a very high level of independence, even to the extent of having an independent foreign relations. While if you take the another case, the Indian federal system is known for its quasi-federation character. That is a mixture of unitary and federal features. Given this background, I want to look at the question of how the idea of shared sovereignty is relevant in the case of the Naga peace process. In order to understand the idea of shared sovereignty in the context of Indo-Naga peace process, one has to understand the history behind the Naga struggle for self-determination. And therefore, I would first dwell a little bit on the the history of the Naga struggle. The Nagas are ethnic nationality comprising of different ethnic groups. Though the very term Naga is contested by some, as it is not a primordial origin, it is a reality, and it is accepted. Accepted. People have accepted the fact that Nagas are considered to be a group of sub-ethnic communities residing at a contiguous area with shared history and similar cultural attributes. This fact is accepted by the Nagas themselves as well as by the outsiders. So the question of Naga as a national identity has passed, according to me, I feel, the stage of national or nationality formation. It has passed. The Nagas are also fiercely independent. The Nagas have fought Britishers to preserve their independence. However, they were finally subjected and incorporated under the British Indian subcontinent, subcontinent. Even while under the British India, Nagas have asserted for self-rule and petitioned the British India to exclude the Nagas from the design of independent Indian subcontinent. Following the inability of the Britishers to officially recognize as a separate political entity at the time of their departure, the Nagas nationalists declared their independence on 14 August 1947, that is one day prior to the Declaration of Indian Independence. However, this declaration could not achieve international recognition, and therefore the struggle continues. In the post-colonial India, the Naga inhabited areas were incorporated into the Indian Republic. At first, on its own volition, India placed the Naga territories under the Ministry of External Affairs, but was unceremoniously stripped off and brought back to the Ministry of Home Affairs in 1972. This incorporation of Nagas into the Indian Union was not without resistance, though. And the struggle for independence from India continued till today. In order to resolve this nationality issue, the Indian state have made various attempts, such as I have mentioned Akbar Hydra NNC Agreement 1904, popularly known as the 9 Points Agreement, the 16 Points Agreement between the Naga People's Convention and the Government of India in 1960, leading to the formation of the present Nagaland statehood, the infamous Shillong Accord 1975, and finally the ongoing peace process since 1997 till date. However, all the previous attempts could not resolve the nationality question, and the nationalist struggle continued with renewed vigor every time an accord is signed. Therefore, the ongoing peace process has sought to address this question by bringing all the stakeholders on board the negotiation and making it a broad-based agreement. As mentioned, the current peace process has been ongoing for the last 23 years, and it is claimed to have achieved a point of agreement based on the idea of shared sovereignty. This agreement was signed on 3rd August 2015 between the Indian state and the Naga nationalists in New Delhi in presence of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and a host of dignitaries from both sides. The agreement is speculated to have contained the broad contour of power sharing known as shared sovereignty. Secondly, the shared sovereignty in the context of Naga peace process. The framework agreement is revealed to have contained the idea of shared sovereignty as the formula for Indo-Naga political settlement. Although the original text of the framework agreement is not produced in white paper, there is sufficient evidence in the public domain from the revelation made by the negotiators from both sides that shared sovereignty is the basis of the settlement. Here again, the term shared sovereignty is not clearly defined. When asked about the meaning of shared sovereignty, the interlocutor, R.N. Ravi, replied, quote, both sides have acknowledged the universal principle that in democracy, sovereignty lies with the people. Government of India have acknowledged the uniqueness of the Nagas. This uniqueness will be reflected in the power sharing, unquote. From what one understands by this term is that the term is used in the sense of sharing of competencies or sharing of powers between the two entities, that is the Indian state and the Nagas. Therefore, we can look at the areas where powers can be shared in a given circumstances. Well, I've skipped one more slides. Anyway, I'll be coming to this. Shared sovereignty is assumed to be some form of special federal arrangement because if it is not a special federal arrangement, there is no logic behind, as India already has a federal form of government whereby the Constitution of India has clearly delineated the powers into union list, state list, concurrent list, and residuary power. Therefore, the idea of shared sovereignty in this context implies a special federal arrangement more than the existing normal power sharing. Moreover, Nagaland state already enjoys special power under Article 371A. Therefore, it is expected that the ongoing power sharing arrangement will be more comprehensive and inclusive, because if it is equivalent to or less than what is already provided, there is no point of another power sharing initiative. So what are the areas that can be shared? Schedule 7 of the Indian Constitution provides the power sharing formula between the union and the states, wherein the union government enjoys exclusive power over 100 items, and the states enjoy exclusive jurisdiction in 61 items. There is also 52 items under concurrent list, which is shared by both the union and the states. In addition to this 7th schedule, Part 11, ranging from Article 245 to 263 of the Indian Constitution, provides further power relation between the union and the states. The items in the union list are those of national interest, such as foreign affairs, defense, atomic energy, railway, currency, airways, judiciary, mineral oil resources, the Reserve Bank of India, Union Public Service Commission, Central Bureau of Investigation, etc. In the context of shared sovereignty, it is expected that some of these items, such as foreign affairs, defense, mineral resources, are to be shared between Indian government and the Nagas. These items are of common concern. For instance, sharing of foreign policy is justified, especially given the circumstances that the Nagas are spread across international boundaries. In the field of defense, joint defense management is also prudent, given the strategic geo-military location of the Naga territory. History shows that on many occasions, Nagas have bravely fought against their enemies to safeguard their borders. As T.H. Moiva stated during the signing of framework agreement, that, quote, Nagas can be trustworthy and take into confidence for any policy in the Northeast and beyond. Given that the land is considered sacred for the Nagas and tied to her identity, she will not easily give up the responsibility of border security to India alone. They have fought to safeguard their land before and will continue to do so with the help of India if possible and alone if necessary. In the same way, there are many areas such as ownership, usage and disposal of land and other natural resources, official language, national identity, religious freedom, etc., whereby the power sharing formula that is uniquely suited to the situation will help develop more trust between the government of India and the Nagas. And such solution can become a model solution in the world to resolve similar cases of ethno nationalism. Now, the concept does not go without challenges. There are many challenges, of course, but I will just be looking at two major challenges here. One is the territorial integrity and the ban Nagahoho vis-a-vis the shared sovereignty. It is difficult to imagine a shared sovereignty without territorial integrity. If the Nagas are not brought under one administrative unit in the form of integration, the idea of shared sovereignty will just be a fantasy. It will be a hollow. For the very fact that a sub-unit within an existing federal unit, that is the state, for example, army within the state of Manipur, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, that will be too big. That will be too big to swallow. I mean, the units are too small to swallow the concept of sovereignty, the sub-units. It will be like an advanced jet fighter without a launching bat if you don't have territorial integration, talking about shared sovereignty. So one should understand that persistent struggle of the Naga nationalist groups is not confined to increasing the power and status of the state of Nagaland alone, but the main objective is the recognition of the Nagas as one nationality. In this regard, therefore, the talk of Ben Nagahoho is also unworkable, according to me, unless there is a wholesome integration. And when we say wholesome integration, we mean physical, geographical, political administration, and socio-cultural economy integration. There is a talk by some section for emotional integration rather than physical integration. And to achieve this, they have suggested for some form of cultural body like the proposed Pan-Naga Hoho. However, there is already similar form of Pan-Naga organizations such as the Naga Hoho, the Naga Students Federation, Naga Mothers Association, and even the Naga People's Movement for Human Rights and PMHR, etc. There is a strong apprehension from the people residing in the state of Nagaland that, excuse me, unless there is a wholesome integration of Naga inhabited areas, partial integration without a physical and economic integration will give rise to a deadly conflict among the various Naga tribes. Therefore, this partial integration is not acceptable. It is an undeniable fact that a partial integration in the form of Ban Nagaho without physical geographical integration will not be acceptable to the people of Nagaland, and it will open a new era of complicated conflict. Territorial integration is, of course, more complicated issue than one can imagine. Rearrangement of territorial boundaries affecting multiple states will not only hurt the pride and ego of the affected states, but also some unpleasant hardship is bound to occur. However, as one NSCN leader, V.S. Atom, argued, Naga problem cannot be solved through the Manipuri or Assamese interest, and that Nagas are not infringing on the rights of these people. Rather, Nagas are only fighting for their rights. Apart from this, there are also other areas such as fictionalism, factionalism, and tribalism, etc. in the Naga peace process. However, these are another area of discussion which I am unable to cover in my presentation today. Now, coming to the issue of separate flag and constitution. Under the concept of shared sovereignty, separate flag and constitution should have been a natural outcome. As discussed above, the Naga struggle for sovereignty was recognized when the current ceasefire and peace process started in 1977 with three preconditions, namely talks at prime ministerial level, talks without precondition, and talks in third countries. This indicates that the Indian government accepted the Naga group as a separate identity, qualified for negotiation. However, the final settlement seems to have reached a deadlock because of the Indian government unwillingness to concede these two demands of the Naga nationalists. To argue that these two demands are not within the ambit of negotiation is not to acknowledge the genuine desire of the Nagas. We can understand the position of the Indian state, that is the principle of one country, one constitution in the process of containing Jammu and Kashmir, basically. However, this should not be the reason for withholding the settlement of the Naga political problem. Such reluctance only shows the insincere attitude of the Indian government to resolve the Naga issue for good. Indian government's approach to the Naga issue seems to be guided by conflict management strategy rather than conflict resolution. This will create a bad precedent in the future for India. It will only create a trust deficit in the minds of others. One should understand that Naga struggle is, on the one hand, a struggle for independence. On the other hand, it is also an identity struggle. Identity struggle, which is to protect and preserve the separate identity of the Nagas. It is only fair that a minority nationality like the Nagas is assured of protecting and preserving their identity. Therefore, the symbolic issues are important in the context of Naga political settlement. Symbolic elements such as flag, anthem, emblem, and constitution are important indicators of the distinct identity. Therefore, it may be possible to compromise other issues under the substantive items. However, it will be very difficult to sell in the domestic constituency a compromise solution without these symbolic elements. It is not also an impossible task for Indian government to recognize these symbolic components of the Nagas. This is not going to lessen India's prestige. It will only show the maturity of the India's approach towards its minority communities or nationalities. Most importantly, it will help resolve the century-old separatist movement. And therefore, to deny these rights just to prove the case of Jammu and Kashmir is not a wise strategy, I feel. In conclusion, as discussed, on the eve of signing the ceasefire and the subsequent peace process between Indian government and ASEAN, three important terms I've mentioned were agreed upon by the two parties, which are talk at prime ministerial level, talk without conditions, and talk in the third countries. All these terms are now blatantly violated one by one. The prime ministerial level talk has now come down to governor interlocutor talk level talk. Talks without condition is now conditioned by the Indian constitution and the inviolability of territory of the states. And the base of negotiation has shifted from Zurich, Bangkok, New Delhi to Dimapur. With multiple changes of hands of negotiators from the Indian side, there is an evidence of slowly undermining the Naga struggle. India seems to be guided purely by the strategy of conflict management, as I've mentioned, rather than an honest effort of conflict resolution. But the veracity of this conflict management approach is questioned by many keen observers with an apprehension in mind that history might repeat itself and the final resolution of the Naga political problem may elude this time again. So I am concluding with on a skeptical note. So that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor, for presenting the views on this long pending issue of sovereignty, shared sovereignty and Naga political process. And thank you for being very candid in presenting your views to us. We have got few questions which the participants have asked. I will put the questions to you and kindly be gracious
Sure.
enough to share your views
Sure.
and points on these issues. The first,
Most welcome.
yes, the first question is a very direct one. It is by Dr. Sanjay Kumar, and he says, can we say peace finally has been established in Nagaland? Point was quite indicating quite a
I have lost your connection.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
Now I can hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was putting across the question to you, which was asked by Dr. Sanjay Kumar, is that can we say peace finally has been established in Nagaland, which more or less was your last ending part of the question was more or less answering on it already. Would you like to say a bit more on this question? Doctor, did you get me? Hello.
Yes, I got your question. Thank you for the question. I feel that, in my opinion, the uh, some sort of peace has already come in the state of Nagaland,
Okay.
but it is like a brief lull before violence can be. So there is definitely we can admit that there is a simmering discontent because of this non-solution of or the non-settlement of the Naga political issue. So on the one hand, it appears to be peaceful in the state, but there are many issues where there are internal conflicts because of but I'm not sure whether I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible, sir.
Hello?
Yes, you are audible.
I'm audible.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, okay, I'm carrying forward then. Okay. In the sense that what is this unit therefore is uniqueness in the sense Nagas were independent before incorporating into the Indian Republic. So there differs the uniqueness of the Nagas from other unique communities in India. So you have to look at and settle the issue. When you say uniqueness, you have to look at from this perspective, because everybody says that the Kashmiris are unique, uh, Dravidians are unique. Uh, Everybody is unique in that sense. But the very fact that officially you have recognized Nagas as a unique is, like I said, from that point of view. Therefore, to approach a solution in this, it has to be unique. And therefore, coming to Indian federalism, uh, the federalism we see already provides enough, a good number of powers to the state. But if you are talking about a unique federal arrangement, then it should uh, take into consideration all this unique aspect of the Naga identity. So I feel that there should be unique special federal
Yes.
arrangement
Send me the
more than
questions.
the normal federal arrangement that
Questions
we
are
see
gone.
now. Yeah, can you?
You continue, sir.
Is there any more question? I can see. Yeah,
There
I
are,
can see some more question here.
Yes, yes. I got lost because of that connectivity. Now I have got connected back. Yes, doctor, could you, yes, just read the question. There is one here. Why the Nagas are not
Yeah.
pursued?
Okay.
Can you hear me, doctor? Phyobenthung?
Yes, yes, I can hear clearly now.
There
Yeah.
is one by Benintang Patten. He is asking a question which says, why
Okay.
the
Yeah.
Nagas are not pursuing or claiming to the international organizations laid down charters for final plebiscite? Why the final plebiscite is not being claimed to the international organization? Hello?
Okay, okay. Yeah, yes, yes, yes. Why is the plebiscite not
Yes.
claimed for international
Yes.
recognition or?
International organizations claiming to
Okay, okay.
international.
Well, okay, okay, okay. So yeah, the whole legitimacy of the Naga struggle is based on the plebiscite in 1950s, and every nationalist factions, respective of their differences, claim this legitimacy, and therefore the struggle continues, and therefore there is uh, a support from the international community as well, though not officially by the powerful countries. There is always a sympathy and support pouring in from different corners in the across the globe. However, the problem here is that India does not take this seriously. Of course, I'm sure India also senses that there is some kind of legitimacy in the struggle of the Nagas. But on the one hand, India tries to downplay this plebiscite. And rather than this, India, after giving a statehood to the state of Nagaland, try to validate their claim, their, let's say, their annexation by conducting 10-year elections to show to the international community that, look here, we have already ascertained the wishes of the people, the mandate of the people. They are ruling, the government is ruled by the mandate of the people. So that is the way India tries to downplay this plebiscite. And therefore, that is where you have to negotiate. Both the parties have their own position, and therefore you have to negotiate. And while negotiating, we have found that the basis of this negotiators from the Indian side is always based on this plebiscite. Of course, they have tried also to uh, bring the issue in the international platform, and to a certain extent they are successful. They are recognized in the unrepresented people's organization. But the most important thing that is lacking is that, which I have mentioned, is the recognition from the international community. Therefore, this is this plebiscite is yet to help in achieving this recognition in the international community. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, sir. In your talk also, you had mentioned about Naga Ho.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, there is one
Yes,
question.
yes, I can hear you.
There is one on Naga Ho which says, how far do you see that the Naga Ho agreement was able to provide the necessary sovereignty and financial autonomy to Naga community by the government of India?
Well, I think that question is not correct, in the sense that
Okay.
Naga Ho is a representative body of the tribes, Naga tribes.
Okay.
But it is not accorded any political or economic power by the state government or by the central government. So we cannot expect the Naga Ho to play this role. It is, in fact, instead of Naga Ho, it is the different nationalist organizations trying to representing the Naga issue and trying to negotiate with the government in order to come to an agreement on the sharing of competencies. That is what we understand.
Okay. Okay. You also touched on your talk regarding the greater Nagaland. There is one direct question which is being asked by Jogan Bora, who says, sir, do you think that greater Nagaland can be formed? In your opinion, can a greater Nagaland be formed?
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. There is a misunderstood notion in the first place. That is that there is no smaller or greater Nagaland. The Nagalim means the area inhabited by the Nagas. So we are talking in the terms of integration of Naga inhabited areas rather than greater Nagalim, because that would imply Nagas trying to grab some territory from other people and make it enlarge their or expand their geographies. That is not the case. This is a misrepresentation of the Nagas. So there is no greater or smaller Nagalim. This has also the same position of the nationalist group, and that is also my opinion. The issue is now, therefore, the Nagas are saying that on this territorial integrity, the Nagas are saying that we are simply asking to recognize us and bring us together under one political administration. We are not going to violate any ancestral territory of the Meiteis or the Assamese or any other communities in the Northeast. We are just going to live in our own land only. So kindly recognize us. That is the Naga integration. There are many problems, as we see. And definitely problem will always be there. If there is no problem, that means that is the end of politics. Therefore, definitely there will be discontentment from the affected state. But I think these are something which can be negotiated, and that can be resolved amicably among the affected state, because because it will only bring a peaceful environment which is going to benefit all the members. Yeah, so on the issue of the
Greater
territorial
Nagaland.
integrity, or
Yeah.
Greater Nagaland, that is being alleged, I would say.
Okay.
There is definitely, this is a thorny issue that needs a lot of efforts from all the sides.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for expounding that. And
Yeah.
as we go ahead, definitely there will be other questions who would again be interlinked with the same question of Nagalim and Greater Nagaland. I shall go ahead with the next question. By
Okay, sure.
Sambabhana Ray, the question is, how would you relate the history of Konoma with the identity of contemporary Nagas? History of Konoma and the identity of contemporary Nagas.
Okay, yeah. Very interesting question from Sambhabana Ray.
Ray, yes.
Yeah. Konoma, the history of Konoma is a classic example of the Naga village. During that time, if you look at the Naga villages are, you know, more or less independent from each other. That is why they used to say that many writers used to say that from time immemorial, we Nagas were independent. So basically, if you look at the Nagas are mostly village oriented. They are considered, their villages were considered as a village republic, in the sense that they were themselves independent. Their domestic as well as foreign affairs, anything to do with the village is solely in the hands of the village. There is no any control from any outside forces. So that is a classic example of Naga village during that time. And even now you will find that villages are very independent. In the sense, even the constitution under Article 371A also recognize special status in the field of customary law, etc. And therefore, in that respect, villages still plays an autonomous and independent role. So a similar kind of villages in terms of their policy, in terms of their approach towards outsiders existed during that time, not only Konoma. And therefore, the Nagas in other villages also, not only Konoma, resisted. From my own tribe, they have even killed a British officer, butler. So these are an example of how hostile the villages are towards their enemy or outsiders' intrusion. And therefore, this sensitivity or the sacredness of the identity is still very strong in the minds of the contemporary Nagas. And that is why they struggle, in spite of all this changed international scenario, international environment, you will find that the Nagas are still very nationalist when it comes to their national identity. Whatever you say, if you come into my sphere of influence, if you come in my jurisdiction, you cannot say anything. You cannot impose any of your laws. So be it their culture, tradition, or be it food habit. So that's a very good example of how the Konoma village has represented an ideal or a model Naga village during that time. And even now, it can be envisaged as a broad character in the struggle of Naga identity in contemporary Nagas.
If you see, since you also have, I think, Q and
Yeah.
answer, by seeing
Anymore.
Sambhana Ray, there is the second part of his question. And from Konoma, history of
Okay.
Konoma identity, he is asking regarding the contemporary Naga society being influenced by westernization. Can you see the second part of the question? What do you think about the
Contemporary Naga?
of the westernization, influence of westernization on the present Naga, contemporary Nagas?
Definitely, I agree to her contention. And in fact, I would say that this is not confined to the Nagas alone. In fact,
Yes.
even the
All
elite
are
Indians,
influenced, yes.
they also, yeah, more or less, because one thing is because of the appeal of the Western culture, I would say, in spite of so many criticism and so many hatred against the Western culture, we accept it. And that also shows that it is not an imposition, first of all. So we cannot actually accuse or blame the Western culture for coming and influencing us. We are actually embracing ourselves, the Western culture. So that happens to almost all the countries in the world. This is also known as the soft power of the Western countries. Look at Arab countries or in many of these Middle East, you will find there is a huge conflict because of the clash of culture, and they feel that the Western culture is a threat to their culture. So for the Nagas, again, that is, I think, you will find more of this, basically because from the beginning, when the very idea of Naga started to appear in the process, in the beginning of the formation of Naga nationhood, they were mostly influenced by the Western education, Western religion, Western lifestyle. So definitely, I would agree that there is a very high level of Westernization, which I would not say that these are all bad, but they definitely had also challenged the culture of the indigenous people like the Nagas, which I am afraid that this is succumbing. The Naga culture is succumbing the uh, to the mainstream culture like the Western as well as even Indian culture. There is a lot of Indianization going on even in the Naga society. So yeah, that is
Yes,
what
that's true.
I feel.
We are being influenced by everyone, and I think both Indian and Western cultures are influencing all of us. Thank you for that view. The next question, I think it can be a separate session by itself because it is a huge area which this question is asking, and you can take your time. We have got a lot of time to explain this. Doctor, the question is, what is UN's view on Nagas? UN's view on Naga. I think you can take a whole seminar on this, I pursue. You can explain to us, yes.
Yeah.
United Nations view on Nagas. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, there is no official statement or official position taken by the United Nations, either by the General Assembly or the Security Council per se on the Nagas. Of course, there had been a lot of resolution in the United Nations Security Council regarding the minority communities and a resolution for nations' right to self-determination, etc. But there is
Okay.
no resolution that officially backs the Nagas. Of course, in different various platforms, the Nagas have expressed their concern, express their struggle in various platforms, and when they get the opportunity. And there was also an effort from the beginning to internationalize the issue. And in fact, because of this, the internationalization, even though it was not officially even though there was no official statement from the United Nations, when Fizo went to London and was about to hold a press conference in 1960, Indian government immediately agreed that we will give Nagaland statehood. So that kind of impact was there. But I think there is no, like I said, official declaration or official statement from the United Nations on the Nagas.
Okay. The next question looks like it could be a continuation of your talk, which you ended with, and it is regarding the uncertainty and insincerity of the government of India in resolving the Naga issue. How do you see the possibility or desirability of an exiled Naga government? And the example being given is like the Tibetan government to carry on the movement. Do you foresee an exiled Naga government to continue the cause of the Nagas like the Tibetan government? In that kind of struggle, can it be continued? What is your opinion on that?
Well, first of all, I have dwelt quite well on the first part, that is the insincerity on the part of the Indian government. History,
that's true.
History is very clear that it could have been solved, but because of the insincere attitude, India has always been playing the conflict management role rather than conflict resolution. So that is why it has protracted for such a long period. In fact, the longest in Asia. So that is definitely there. But the exile government, I think, was there in the sense that the different Naga factions were running parallel government. Their leaders were exiled. Even the NSCN-IM leaders were exiled, all of them, most of them, and they have come back because of the ceasefire and negotiations since 1997. Now, if the situation goes to worse, in a worst case scenario, we never know. Another exile government may be the option. But as for now, why not exile government? Because the nationalist groups are under negotiation with the Indian government, and there is there's no need for an exile government right now.
As of now, okay. But the option could be there.
Option could be there. We never know. Only those,
Okay.
Only they know.
We'll move ahead, doctor. There is one from Mahavir Jha. He has got two questions. One looks to be a very theoretical type, and he's asking, what is the difference between negotiated sovereignty and shared sovereignty? Since our topic is on shared sovereignty, he's asking what is the difference between negotiated sovereignty and shared sovereignty?
I got it.
Yes, doctor.
Actually, it's just a difference in terminology. Otherwise, there is no. I feel that there is no difference between negotiated sovereignty and shared sovereignty, because this basically is the belief of the pluralist understanding of sovereignty, that sovereignty can be shared. Sovereignty can be shared. So it can be through a negotiation or maybe through a mutual understanding. So there is no difference between the shared sovereignty and negotiated sovereignty.
And the second part of the question, though you have dealt with it in your main talk, you could perhaps give a bit more insight to it. And it says, if it is a shared sovereignty given to Nagaland, according to your view, what items will be shared? What would be the items which would be shared if it is a shared sovereignty?
Can be. That is why negotiation is essential, and that is why we are having negotiation. There can be negotiated settlement in all this, not only with India, but in all this issue of territorial integrity.
Coming to this issue, the same issue of territorial integrity, and from Arunachal Pradesh, there is one question on Senapati district. On Senapati district.
No, that
and
is in
Manipur.
Yeah, okay.
Manipur. I'm just linking the thing since
Manipur.
it is on territorial issue, and I think
Okay,
perhaps
yeah.
the reply could be the same. And it says, sir, what do you think about Senapati district of Manipur, which sometimes the Naga government used to claim that it belongs to Nagaland?
Okay. Yeah, that is interesting. That is where we are having a dilemma. The thing is, actually, this is a conflict between two communities. It's not between a conflict between two states.
States. Okay.
It was a conflict between the Mao and the southern Angamis. Angami also, southern Angamis.
Okay.
Yeah, because their geographical area borders each other. So definitely some skirmishes will be there. But how this was made into state issue, interstate issue is, I think, it's little out of context, because even the state government has been saying that this is between the two communities, and since they are all Nagas, they should resolve according to the customary law. Yeah. So yeah, there is no. The conflict is not between the states.
States. Okay.
Yeah.
I asked it because the question has come. So just to respond to the one who asked the question,
No problem.
I just put it across. Yeah. Then next one is, I think it is a very relevant question, I feel. How far has the unresolved Naga issue led to economic underdevelopment in Nagaland? Economic underdevelopment in Nagaland.
Yes.
Because of this unresolved issue of political issue.
Yes, yes. Very far, I would say. If you're asking how far, it has definitely affected the economy of the state and people very much. And Nagas have paid a lot in terms of economic price. And therefore, when the Nagas demand for some kind of compensation or some kind of special grant package, they are not out of context because of this conflict. And you cannot blame this conflict to the Nagas alone. Conflict involves two parties or more than two parties. So that is why India is also responsible. And therefore, when there is a solution, there should be an economic component in the solution as well. You will see that in Nagaland, if you look around, the level of economic development is very far behind, even from among the northeastern states. And this, as we all know, that it is because of the insurgency issue, because of this conflict, unresolved conflict. So, yeah, I would say that it has greatly affected the state, and in this kind of situation, like a nationalist struggle, a state or an area where there is such problem going on, it is very natural that these things happen. Because insurgency or nationalist struggle, on the one hand, they are not recognized by the official government. They cannot run. They cannot run as an official government. But we also know that there is some parallel government going on because they have to
manage their organization, they have to manage their cadres, they have to run their parallel government, etc. So in the process, people suffer. And economy takes backseat. So definitely economy was the casualty, the first primary casualty in this struggle. So yeah, very far it has affected very much, yeah.
So to more or less to give a conclusion to what you are saying, there is one Benry Patton. I think he's also a Lotha, I think, Patton.
He's a colleague of mine. Yeah.
Oh,
yes,
he's a colleague of mine.
Colleague of mine, yeah.
Okay, then the solution that is being proposed is, then shall we postpone our demand for a while? I will read the previous part of what she has said.
Okay, please.
How many decades do we wait for the final Naga peace settlement? This deadlock has severely curtailed our state's progress and development, which you were just speaking about.
Yes.
Then the sentence concludes by saying, then shall we postpone our demand for a while? What do you say?
I would say that instead of postponing, we should hasten the process and come to a logical conclusion.
So
because we all know that this is affecting all of us. We have a state government, but we also know that these state governments are not, are always challenged by the nationalist section on legitimacy, many times on legitimacy. So there is a high level of corruption because of this. And like I said, you cannot escape from this.
Okay.
It just comes natural.
Okay.
And therefore, when it comes to economic development, social progress, and unity of the people, and everything, it boils down to Naga political problem. The more you postpone, the more you will suffer, and the more you will go backward. And therefore, instead of postponing, we should all unite together, and we should all come together and strike a deal once and for all, because the issue is one, irrespective of the division by tribe, division by factions, the issue is one. So we should rather, and I feel that if there is unity, if there is one voice from all the Nagas, then I'm sure even the Indian government will also be moved to hasten the solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next question looks like intertribal question, and but then I think it may be a question being asked by many tribes, many other tribes too, and it is from one person, Abon Vincent Gangmei. He says, "Sir, my simple question is, why some of the Nagas of Nagaland want to exclude their brethren who are from outside Nagaland state?" As I said, it looks like a inter-tribe question, intertribal question. What is the situation, Doctor?
I think that is a very honest and straightforward question. Yeah,
there
definitely.
Are many Nagas outside Nagaland, true.
There is definitely an issue here, in the sense that people in Nagaland, the Nagas of Nagaland, are have a second thought, in the sense that if there is an integration should be along with the geographical physical territory. Otherwise, if it is an integration excluding this, then that is going to have a far-reaching impact on the Nagas of Nagaland. If you are trying to share the political power, administrative power, or economic power without bringing your resources, then that would mean that it will have an adverse impact on the Nagas of Nagaland. And I think there, on the one hand, there is also a valid apprehension on the part of the Nagas of Nagaland, but on the other hand, we have to understand that whenever there is some kind of solution, there are always people who wants to be in power and try to, use this machinery for their vested interest. Nobody wants to relinquish their interest or power. So some people who are in power may be an obstacle for the solution, but I think as a whole, everybody, irrespective of all the divisions and spectrums or selfish interest, everybody is of unanimous opinion that this problem should be resolved once and for all.
There is a solution from what you are talking. There is someone giving a little bit of solution to inter-tribal within the Naga community itself. And the solution seems to be, is Pan Naga Hoho a solution to Naga problem?
Well, it depends. If you are giving this Pan Naga Hoho,
yes.
or any other common platform, a political economic power,
okay,
then I am sure it is a way out. There is a solution there. But if you are forming this organization simply for cultural and social purpose, then I don't think it will have a big impact on the issue, on the problem. Because like I said, we already have similar kind of organizations in the form of Naga Hoho, in the form of Naga Students Federation, and like the NPMHR, etc. But these are purely looking at and fighting for, mostly fighting in respect of safeguarding the customary practices of the Nagas. But in reality, when the political administrative power is not there, you cannot make laws, you cannot make rules. And that is the most important thing of in state power. So this Pan Naga Hoho is an excellent idea if it is, if it is vested with political and administrative power. Otherwise, I think it is just too much of idealism, I would say.
Okay. We have got again number of questions which are there, but because of the time limit, I would be asking you the last question, and thank you very much for very candid in expressing your views on all the questions that were being asked. And the final question for this session is, seeing what happened to Jammu and Kashmir, is the special provision for Nagaland under Article 371 under any threat?
We never know. Indian government's policy is unpredictable, and particularly the current government, which is mostly of which is so nationalistic. They may come with any excuse and scrap these special provisions, as we have seen in Jammu and Kashmir. But I think it will be very blunder if the special provision for the Nagas is scrapped, because whatever is your intention, the reality is that the Nagas are culturally different in terms of their linguistic, in terms of their racial stock and their cultural practices, history, etc. And therefore, you have to respect. In some way or other, you have to accord this distinct identity to the people. And therefore, if it is scrapped, then I think the little support that some section of the society in the Naga society, the little support that India is getting from these people will also go away. So I think it's the special provision is in a way an insurance for the Indian state to let Nagas in the Indian Union.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor, for
Most welcome.
sharing
It's
and
my pleasure.
expressing all your opinion and expressions. And definitely, this is a long pending issue that we have been dealing with. And definitely, we pray that the solution is coming forward very honestly and sincerely,
Hopefully.
beneficial to all of us. Thank you very much for joining our webinar organized by our Don
Welcome.
Bosco College, Golaghat. And
Okay.
we have
Most
really,
welcome.
and I do apologize for all the other participants whose questions we have not been able to put forward to Doctor surely because of lack of time. Because we are going to go over to the second topic of our session today. And Doctor, if you have also time, you could join it because it is a very current topic. And the topic is on the impact of
Sure.
CAA in indigenous identity. I think very relevant and very hot topic just now. And it will
Yes.
be dealt with by
Yes.
Dr. Kaustabh Deka, Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University. He will be dealing the issue. And so now may I request Madam Rimi Sharma to introduce the speaker to us. Rimi Sharma.
Thank you, Father. Once again, it's a pleasure for me to introduce our next speaker for today, Dr. Kaustabh Deka, who is going to speak on impact of CAA in indigenous identity claims and contention. Dr. Kaustabh Deka is an assistant professor, Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University, Assam. He had been teaching at the Center for Northeast Studies and Policy Research in Jamia Millia Islamia Central University, New Delhi. His research on student activism in Assam has been brought out as a monograph by Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. He has been a recipient of the Public Policy Fellowship. Beside publishing books and journals, he is also a columnist and a panelist in the revolving media. Recently, in the 11th International Convention of Asia Scholar at University of Leiden, he had presented on the changing citizenship laws in India and the context of Assam. Welcome, sir. Looking forward to your talk.
My pleasure.
The session is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Rimi, for introducing Dr. Kaustabh Deka. Dr. Kaustabh,
Thank you.
I think you will be in the firing line because you have taken the most
Yes.
contentious issue to deal with. Most
Yeah.
welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Come on.
Thank you.
The session is yours. Can you take over, Doctor?
Thank you. A very good afternoon to all of you, rather good morning to all of you. And am I audible? My voice is coming fine? Okay.
Yes.
I must thank Don Bosco College Golaghat for this wonderful opportunity of discussing this as the host has already mentioned, a very contemporary and contentious, might say very delicate topic that has actually kept all of us in a grip this past few months. And in fact, I am thankful to the Don Bosco College for this, for assigning me, suggesting this topic. Because this topic, I mean, most of us have been dealing with this topic for last almost now 7-8 months and little more than that. But now it feels in a way very different because now sitting in this situation of today, there is a lockdown or partial lockdown in different places, the situation of pandemic where there is isolation, physical and social distancing. To remember those days in December and January last winter, where there were massive mobilization on the streets. There were paramilitary out on the street. There was curfew. There were a lot of tension, and at the same time, a lot of deliberation, a lot of discussions, big rallies. So the atmosphere was so different. It's kind of difficult to imagine that it's been just 6 to 7 months. Nevertheless, of course, the undercurrents are very much prevalent even now. The topic, the question of Constitutional Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, and the impact of it on the population, on the people of this region is far from over. And as we know, this is still a very relevant theme, which is kind of a way you can say polarizing the people here, which is going to be an issue of the upcoming elections, and also which will continue to be a very volatile platform for different kind of mobilization. Okay, so with this very in a way quick, in a way anecdotal background, now let me try to get into the topic of today. But while doing so, I would like to take my time in kind of setting out the context also, as well as trying to understand the different implication of different terms that we are going to use. So we are going to talk about the impact of CAA, that is the Citizenship Amendment Act, on the indigenous population of Northeast India. So now we see that we are already using terms like indigenous, which is in fact a very difficult term to define also, or a difficult term to bracket within few parameters. So first of all, that is something that we have to go with a definition. What do we mean by indigenous? That is one. And at the same time, while we talk about CAA and Northeast India, one has to make a very crucial kind of a distinction of the impact of CAA in the context of India vis-a-vis the impact of CAA in the rest of India. I will come to these points further why I make these differences or distinctions. But first of all, let's try to understand the whole idea of indigenous. Who is an indigenous? Who qualifies to be an indigenous? Now, this has been a debate that has been, in a way, you can say, taking Northeast India in a path of volatile mobilization. It has taken it by storm, if you would like to say that, to define, to zero in on a definition of indigenous, because we see that different people have overlapping claims. The identities are in a way conflicting. So it is not easy. So at one level, of course, it is an issue of political mobilization. But at another level, let us try to see what are some of the available definitions, what are some of the definitions being used by different groups and different agencies, and also what are some of the definitions that has been time to time being forwarded by different state governments as well as different social movements in the region. So of course, I mean, most of us know that there are three keywords, there are three criteria by which we define indigeneity or indigenousness. And ILO has given two paramount criteria in 1994 at its International Labour Organization, have looked into it, and they have given two overarching criteria. Of course, I'm not getting into the details of it because there are too many different aspects and dimensions in that, which because of time I'm just focusing on the basic points. One, of course, ILO talks about the whole idea that it can be synonymous with tribal people, provided their social, cultural, and economic conditions are distinguished from the other section of national community. Very broadly, I'm speaking very broadly. And the second is that indigenous are those people who are already inhabiting a country in the time of conquest or colonization. So conquest or colonization time, the population that were already inhabiting those countries also qualifies to be indigenous. Then there are other definitions. For example, United Nations Working Group on Indigenous Populations, which is a very influential body, they have come out with some criteria kind of similar to ILO, but they have expanded it further. And they talk about, of course, that descendants of the groups who are in a territory when other people, other culture or other ethnic origin people arrived. That is one. And then number two, this is the important point, is that those people who have managed to preserve their customs, cultures, languages, and which kind of sets them apart from the culture, customs, and languages from the other parts of the country. And number three is that, this is a crucial point from Northeast India, I believe, is that those people or those section of population who are put in a structure of a national state, whose overarching culture, overarching languages, overarching characteristics are alien to their own cultures and characteristics. So what we see here is that broadly the emphasis has been on the issue of, one is their origin, as well as equally important is their sense of difference, sense of uniqueness, sense of distinction. and how far they have been able to preserve this. And then there are a number of different propositions. World Bank have looked into it. The other organizations have looked into it. And what are some of the common themes we see is that people emphasize on the prevalence of customary law is one, whether the communities are continuing with customary laws. They emphasize on the prevalence of a unique language, and then also they emphasize on the how far they are able to maintain and kind of preserve their uniqueness. So we will try to see, I mean, when we talk about CAA and the impact of indigeneity, what we have to understand is that these are some of the, can say broader context under which indigenous right and indigeneity has been understood. But when it comes to India and Northeast India also, we have seen that indigeneity has been more than anything else, it also has been a political question. It is closely bound to claims of territory, status, identity, and power, political power. So indigeneity has been an issue about political status and power, also a political question. And as anthropologist B.G. Carlson, who looks very closely at Northeast, have said actually that indigenous politics actually has given a new grammar of politics to the people of the region as to how to assert their political claims. So within this context, what I will try to do now is that while I discuss CAA, I will try to see how we understand indigeneity in 2-3 different ways, and how then CAA is an impact, or CAA is an influence, or you can say in CAA will determine how that politics will go forward. So that is one part of the talk I will do. But before going into the exact debate of CAA and indigeneity and Northeast, let us try to look at the second aspect I was mentioning, that why CAA has to be contextualized in a complex background of Northeast India, which has some complexity and uniqueness, which needs to be specially looked into, specially understood. Now, again, these are broad areas, so I'm just in a way, putting the broader themes or concising and hoping to take it further in question answer round. So Northeast India, as we know, has been variously looked at by various historians, anthropologists, social scientists, political scientists, and one unanimous understanding is that Northeast it is an unfinished story of partition, that this cartographic kind of redesigning that colonialism has done and which post-colonial state have carried has set a very important context to understand Northeast India. That William Van Schendel, who works in these issues, especially the issues of borderland, he calls Northeast India a freak child of partition. In a very interesting phrase he used, freak child of partition. That how there are a lot of territories who were artificially split into two, state boundaries were artificially drawn, and so it has left an enduring impact on the way politics is understood and done in the region. So that is one. So that, in other sense, that is the context of geopolitics. So geopolitics remains a very critical context when we talk about Northeast India. And then with that, other issue is that the area has always been looked as a development deficit region. If you see right from the beginning of the first 5-year plan till the formation of Northeast Council and other bodies, infrastructural development and other kind of development has been a key focus in which the state has been approached. So there has been a lot of funds that have poured into the region, that especially Ministry of Development of Northeast region, donor, and all these ministries have been formed. So development has been a key approach through which, in the policy framework, in the policy parameters, Northeast has been placed as an area that needs development. So that has been one. But what is interesting, and what scholars like Sanjeev Barua has time and again pointed out, is that this whole idea of development and coercion, or you can say, in a way, a particular politics of authoritarianism, they go hand in hand. It's a loop, basically. There's a symbiosis between the two. The development, politics around development and politics of militarization, they go hand in hand, and they are actually two ends of the same thread. So that is a point one needs to understand more, that how there is a complex kind of a loop. And that is why we see that whereas this region also has ministries like donor At the same time, we also have completely, you can say, anti-democratic acts like Armed Forces Special Powers Act. These are contradictory dimensions that exist within the same region, and we have to understand why this contradiction is in a way mandated. So development is one, security or geopolitics is one. So this region has to be viewed as a security sensitive region, at the same time a development deficit region. And the third angle and the third aspect that completes this whole, the third aspect that completes this this in a way, you can say, that whole structure is that the aspect of the region and its cultural obscurity, that this region has always been seen as an obscure region, as people like, I think Samir Das has mentioned that the Northeast had always a very uneasy existence in the Indian imagination. And again, now we don't have time to go back to the larger context, but there are different people, including recently Perry Anderson also, who has looked into it, and he says that how that Hindu kind of imagination has in a way tended to exclude certain section from the imagination, and including in our, if we extend it to the issue of profiling race and all that, one should look into a very interesting essay by scholar T.B. Subba and Yellowwooters, who talks about the typography or the types of Indian face, and they talk about the quote unquote the stereotypical Northeast face that one associates with, how it does not feature in the imagination of the Indian face. So this cultural obscurity has been one, again, another way that this region has been imagined. So security, development, and culture, these three broad dimensions, and how these three broad dimensions are in a very precarious balance vis-a-vis the machinization of a dominant Indian state, that has defined the way politics has unpacked in India's Northeast. I'm giving a very broad kind of analysis. I know there are so many intercomplexities within this, and if there are questions in question answer Q&A round, we can take them. But quickly, it is important to give that because unless and until we know this history, it will be difficult to know the problems what Northeast India is facing vis-a-vis the citizenship discourse. Now, we know that citizenship has always been a very sensitive issue in Northeast, and why we talk about Northeast as a zone of exception. The 3 points I mentioned, it becomes a zone of exception, and the citizenship, Indian citizenship, has always been a very complex negotiation. It's been a matter of very complex negotiation when it comes to this zone of exceptions, and we know that for most part of its modern history, Northeast India has been facing a crisis of citizenship. That what it means to be an Indian citizen has meant different thing at different point of time. So, so this situation of durable disorder, that which some scholars use this term, durable disorder, has to be understood when we talk about citizenship. And very briefly now, citizenship has been about one's identity, one's claim to resources, and one's claim to how they approach the structures of the state. And I don't think I need to go into details of what CAA entails here, Constitution, Citizenship Amendment Act entails, but very briefly, still for everybody's, so that we're on the same page. And as we know that this, which was a bill called CAB, Citizenship Amendment Bill 2019, was passed finally in December into an act, and it has actually given citizenship offers rights to persons belonging to 6 religious groups: Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, Parsis, and Christians from 3 of the neighboring countries, that is Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, to the domain of Indian citizenship. And it also changed the existing requirements of 11 years of ordinary residence reduced it to 6 years of ordinary residentship before they can apply for, before they can be naturally, accumulated into the citizenship fold of India by naturalization. So this was the bill in very brief manner. This was what the bill entailed, and as we can see already, at the theoretical level, at the level of citizenship debate, it has done one critical thing, is that it has basically, number one, it has made religion as a marker of defining marker of citizenship, because as we see that it has left out few religious groups consciously. It has left out groups like Muslims and Jews. That is one. And second thing that it has done is that the whole norms of citizenship, that is one is that based on territory, that is just solely or use solely, that was the defining norm mostly in the existing citizenship norms of India, and it has tried to move to the norm of use sanguinis, or something that is based on descent or blood ties. So, and it has not been something very defining just with this act. As people have observed, it has gradually been moving that side with subsequent amendments in '86 and 2003. The citizenship discourse was moving from use soli to use sanguinis. But what happened with this particular act is that it has made it almost final, that it is no more enough to be born in a territory of India, but it also has to be that your descent, that is your religion or your kind of affiliations, also have to conform to certain parameters. In this case, that some religions have been excluded, so that it has taken a kind of a specific position. So of course, because of on this, especially on this ground, that on religious discrimination or being a frontal affront, you can say a frontal affront to the idea of secularism, which is a basic structure or a basic doctrine of Indian constitution and Indian political system, massive opposition have been raised against this act, and it has gone to the Supreme Court, and a number of petitions have been filed in the Supreme Court, and it is at present under review. Although it has been passed by the Parliament already in both houses and it is an act, but the validity has been challenged in the court, in judiciary. So what at this point we have to make a distinction is that the nature of protest and the ground of protest in the rest of India vis-a-vis Northeast India is critically different. Why is that? For that we have to go back to understand the anxieties that people in Northeast India do have vis-a-vis the notion of citizenship and the provisions of citizenship. And I told you the three ways in which it is produced as a zone of exception. And in that, we have to talk about Assam in a central way, because a lot of experiments, you can say, a lot of experiments when it comes to citizenship has happened in the state of Assam, in the state of Assam. And in the case of Assam, to give you a brief history, right from the days of partition and independent India, Assam has gone through a heavy demographic shift. If you see the population composition, one would see that Assam has gone through a major shift, incessant kind of a shift right from those days. And because of that, issues of identity has been always something that has been always in the mind of people of Assam. That has been a driving force of different movements, different social mobilization in the state of Assam. And 1950s and 60s, one could see that these are movements around a plethora of issues. These are not movements just against illegal migration, just against the outsider or foreigner, but different movements which has a complex ecology. We have to understand it as a whole. So there are movements about issues of culture and identity. There are movements about issues of economic rights, and then there are movements about the issue of foreigners or outsiders. So these are different sets of movements, essentially interconnected, and that is why one has to emphasize again, time and again. And we have seen it in the case of CAM agitation also last year, that moment one talks about identity in Northeast India, be it cultural identity, linguistic identity, even religious identity in a way, issues of resources always crop up because it is inevitably related to the issue of resource control or issue of land or the issue of tangible economic rights. This aspect we will again take up later. But at this moment, let's remember that 50s, 60s, there are movements about refinery, oil refinery, demanding oil refinery in Assam. There are movements demanding the recognition of Assamese language, more kind of safeguard to Assamese language. There are demands against price rise of essential items. So there are different types of these movements, which eventually culminates in the powerful Assam movement of the late 1970s and early 80s. Now that's a very complex and very detailed debate there in social science and in other forums. What was the defining characteristics of Assam movement? Was there a shift from the economic issues to the cultural or linguistic issues? Who were the driving force behind Assam movement? All these issues for the timing we are not touching in details. What is sufficient for us at this moment is to emphasize is that Assam movement, the central demand of Assam movement eventually was around the issue of 3D, that is deletion, detection and deportation of suspected illegal migrants from the soil of Assam. And Assam movement was also a movement that became a reference point to different social groups in Northeast India. Around the same time, we had these similar demands coming out from different states about this issue of suspected illegal migrants in their respective lands. And in Assam especially, there was an allegation that a large number of them have in fact enrolled into the voters list. So there was an allegation of that time. So there's a complex story how it developed, how students became central in that whole mobilization, and how basically it has become one of the biggest, like people like Ghanshyam Shah, who chronicles social movements, talks about as the biggest social uprising in India in post-emergency India. After the emergency time, anti-Congress kind of mobilization, he says this was the biggest mobilization in post-emergency India. So that way we have seen that what was the outcome when it comes to issue of citizenship of Assam movement was a very crucial outcome was that Assam Accord of 1985 mandates a new criteria of determining citizenship in India. That is November 1986, there was a very important amendment in the Citizenship Act of 1955. It added section C6A. What section 6A talks about is that it introduced the sixth category of citizenship in India. What are the existing 5 categories right now? Let's look at it. That it was a category based on birth, based on descent, based on registration, based on naturalization, and by virtue of incorporation of foreign territory. These are the 5 ways in which someone can qualify as a citizen of India. This section 6A of Assam Accord, mandated by Assam Accord, has actually introduced a new category in which even a person who has entered the state of Assam after the midnight of March 31st March 1971, that was why, because that was the day, the creation of Bangladesh, that was the time of creation of Bangladesh. So before that, if someone comes over to the state of Assam and can produce documents proving that he or she can still apply to be a citizen of India. So this was a new form or new entry point. Apart from the existing 5 category, this was the 6th entry point that was provided. So in a way, this can be talked about as a 20 years exception formula. What I would like to say, this was a 20 years exception rule for Assam, because for rest of India, the cutoff time has been already as 1951. It was frozen at 1951, the entry. Of course, till CAA came. I'm talking about before CAA. Now, of course, CAA has opened the floodgates all again. But this, for Assam, this was considered a 20 years exception rule. That 1951 was for rest of India, then 1971 was made for Assam. So the argument in Assam was that this was some kind of a compromise, because after the movement, people of Assam have accepted this additional 20 years kind of a window, the 20 years window that was given. People of Assam has come to accept this. there was a consensus that was created. Of course, there were a lot of fraction within that. A lot of people not happy with this concession. Even now, there are cases pending in the court. There are a lot of organizations fighting for it, saying that we should roll it back to 1951 again. But largely, if we talk about the larger social consensus in Assam, starting from Assam movement, was that 1971 was accepted as a compromise formula between the state of India and the people doing the spearheading Assam movement and the social classes in Assam, that it was basically seen as a compromise narrative. So what has now really provoked the people here is that they see that a lot of people think that by allowing 2014, because CAA, the window that is given is 2014, that till people who come up till 2014 will be given the option of those 6 groups that I mentioned, this 6 religious group, they will be given the option of applying for citizenship. They will be absorbed into the fold of Indian citizenship, has in a way further pushed it by many years and has made Assam movement and the accord, especially the provisions of Assam Accord, have been made redundant. So that was one big complaint. So the whole idea about constitutional morality, because often CAA is saying that CAA is against constitutional morality, and constitutional morality is based on Republican and secular foundation. In Assam, the question further is that this whole balance or a negotiation with the constitutional morality has been further corrupted by CAA. Now coming to why, how is it specific to the indigenous point of views, and as we discussed, what are the criteria of defining indigenous, in that the term specifically coming to Assam, that has often been collapsed. Indigenous have often been collapsed with the idea of Bhumiputra Khilonjia, that is son of the soil or aborigines. So indigenous has often been collapsed with this. The definition of indigenous have been taken as synonymous with son of the soil. So because of that, what is interesting to understand is that if we take the definition of indigenous as an operative word, as an operative definition, that would include a large number of large sections, including the small tribes within Assam, all the tribal hill dwelling population in Northeast India, also those valley people who identifies with a pre-colonial culture, who has a distinctive language and culture, and who maintains and preserves them. So it becomes an encompassing kind of a large kind of a umbrella kind of a definition. And if we understand how politics of indigeneity has developed in Northeast India, is very interesting, because there are groups, Indigenous People's Forum, Indigenous People's Networks, different groups are there. It has been a forum which fights some kind of otherization by larger power structures, by state, by larger communities. They have been fighting this otherization. So indigenous or indigeneity in Northeast India has been a unifying kind of a forum. It has been a unifying plank. And why CAA was seen as a threat, or seen as a problem from this point of view, is that in Northeast India, the social imagination has more of a indigenous life world, not so much a religious life world. So you have to understand that, because the sensitivities or sensibilities of the region revolves around the frame of indigenousness, that is to do with one's rootedness with land, not so much with one's attachment with their ABCD different languages. So this peculiar or complex politics of identity which is at play, it often anchors around identity metrics of different kinds. For example, in the case of Assam, the identity matrix is basically around language. Again, here we have to go back to the colonial time onwards, how basically it is evolving through attachment to language. Linguistic nationalism has always replaced religious nationalism, and the very formation of middle classes in different states of Northeast India actually is around, you can say, around a negotiation with language in two ways: language as one's identity, plus language as resources. Because language has this twin aspect: it is one's identity as well as it is one's resources to get other kind of facilities. So Northeast, so language have always a very crucial dominance over identity discourse of Northeast India, and this is where the understanding of CAA, that CAA is something that privileges religious marker over other markers, have faced stiff resistance. Because if you talk about historically, language has always been the primary marker over religion also. And now, of course, since we are not specifically talking of Assam, I'm not getting into the details of why in Assam language have been a primary marker of identity. But very briefly, if I give an example of CAA, there are different studies of the census reports over the years. And if you collect all the information and if you compare the information, it can be perceived that there is an apprehension in Assam that the rise of speakers of non-Assamese groups, especially Bengali speakers who constitutes quite a significant section within Assam, is on a rise, steady rise, and number of Assamese speakers are on a decline over the censuses. So what has happened is that if you try to understand this nature of this rise and decline, some estimates can be made that it has nothing to do with religion as such, but there is a combined rise of Bengali Muslims as well as Bengali Hindus that actually has led to a combined rise in the number of Bengali speakers. So it is a very complex equation, but these are a type of dissections that actually make sense of this unified resistance across religion, across ethnicity, so to say, to this type of a new act that threatens, that disturbs, or that threatens the precarious sensitivity when it comes to language. Because what we have to understand is that, interestingly, in the case of state of Northeast India, the size of linguistic groups also varies. Some of them will be so small or so fragile and so vulnerable that even minuscule migration also can change the linguistic and cultural profile for them. So that is something we have to keep in mind, that vulnerability or smallness of the size of different cultural or linguistic groups, that for them the other groups, or bigger groups, are always seen as aggressor, and they are extremely uncomfortable with the idea of migration of people from dominant linguistic cultural groups, even though they themselves, people of those groups might be as claimed, might be persecuted or might be a minority in their own places, but they will be seen as part of a larger cultural complex. So that is one thing. And another very interesting way how CAA has to be connected to indigeneity is that the whole ecological arguments from the ecological point of view of how it is about contentious demographics and resource claims. Now, another way of understanding indigeneity is that nowadays there is a evolving consensus again that has been at the different international forums, in that indigenous rights or indigeneity also have been increasingly seen as a you can say capacity to connect with their resources, a capacity to meaningfully command their natural resources and engage with their natural resources, or you can say a dignified existence with the nature, or dignified existence in the natural landscape. So these are new ways of looking into ecology, indigeneity, where ecology plays a crucial role. And what we have seen here, again, I again refer to B.G. Carlson, who has an interesting book called Unruly Hills, Ecological History of Northeast India, where he talks about this idea of resource frontier, Northeast India as a resource frontier. And he says that how Northeast has increasingly becoming a resource frontier, where the local people of the places, they are not being able to meaningfully relate with their resources. There is a gap, there is a schism between the resources of the place and the extraction of the resources. So this is a very crucial context, especially in present circumstances, where we are hearing so many allegations, debates, discussions about extractive economic regimes, extractive resource economy. And this again, this has to be again understood meaningfully going back to the colonial times, how in fact if we understand the whole formation of Northeast India as a category, as a policy frame, then we see the resources, extraction of resources have always played a very, very crucial role here. Because we have seen that how from colonial time onwards, the area has been seen as a area where it was seen as an area, vacant area, where it was not producing enough revenue, where the population was seen as quote unquote lazy, lazy natives. They were seen as lazy natives who are not fit for modern economic extraction. So right from that point, in a way, subsequently the whole demographics of the area, the economic profile of the area, everything has gone a major shift based on the fundamental understanding of the region as a region with a lot of resources and with emptiness and with a troubling population, a population which is unruly. So these are some of the fundamental tropes through whom the region has been understood and has been conceived of. So that ecological anxieties also remains very much writ large on the minds of people of this place. And quickly, if we look at some of the statistics, for example, in now also a state like Assam, the landslide and land erosion due to flood, a flood-prone area that remains many, many times higher than national average. And then deforestation, although Northeast is one of the most biodiverse hotspot of the country, deforestation rate is also very high. So, I mean, in this situation, because where Northeast India is going through this resource crisis, this problem of balance, it was very apprehensive of accommodating further kind of incoming migrants, because it was citizenship is also a bond of entitlement. When you make somebody a citizen, that she or she is entitled to resources. It is also about resource sharing. So this ecological social balance of Northeast India was very much in a way in a precarious position, and people were very much unhappy. They thought that their indigenous life form, which is already in a very tight place, will be further compromised if Northeast give assent to further kind of migrants. It did not have a capacity to command over their own natural resources, so it was uneasy in accepting further people to share the resource with. So the other side of this, the other danger of this is that we have seen that how different claims of indigeneity, as we discussed already, it is not easy to define or fix the idea of who is indigenous, and in Northeast we have overlapping claims, and that we have seen that already this has collapsed into a son of the soil doctrine, and this son of the soil doctrine sometimes leads to conflict and militarization and brutal kind of clashes within population groups. And if we try to understand, at the root of this is a conflict over resources, who have claim over resources. So in this situation of contentious resource scape, if we add more kind of migrants, more citizens, then the situation will be further in a way explode. So that is why one has to take a pause and reflect very critically on that. So this, as so far we saw how it was against the received wisdom, or you can say against the existing norms of cultural identity, linguistic identity, and it is against the norm of existing sense of ecological security, that people felt insecure when it comes to ecological sense and resource sense. So what about the question of land here? Because there are a lot of new studies, interesting studies that have come up that look at how land is at the root of a lot of these problems, and dispossession of land has been taken forward ruthlessly, not only by migrants has come in waves over the century, but also in recent times under the aegis of a neoliberal state in the name of development. As we know, the indigenous have always been the first victims of so-called quote-unquote development. So displacement-induced development, development-induced displacement, has been one predominant feature, and there are a lot of studies that have documented. And although it does not, many a times it escapes the popular discourse, but if you see the records and studies, it is a massive phenomena that is actually currently sweeping Northeast, and it's producing Northeast actually has become now migrant producing region because of this. So question of land has been at the root of a lot of these claims and contestations. And interestingly, government of Assam has formed a committee in last few years to define actually the indigenous in the state of Assam and to give some safeguards to the indigenous. And I will come to this politics of this later. Why this politics? What is the politics of this? But this is called Harishankar Brahma Committee. And Harishankar Brahma Committee, in fact, have interestingly, finally, after talking about the same characteristic that we mentioned before, that people's place of origin at the time of colonization, people's sense of distinct culture, language, after saying this similar two things as United Nations or ILO, they have come down on a definition of land rights. And they said actually that that one way to in a way secure the rights of the indigenous is to give them tangible land rights. And they mention unabated mass infiltration as the biggest threat to the indigenous identity of people. So they wanted to, one of the recommendation was to put put restrictions on transfer of land in any form from a citizen to non-citizen, or agricultural land cannot be in any way converted to non-agricultural land, and it cannot be given from indigenous to non-indigenous, and protected class to non-protected class, and under the Assam Land Ordinance. But the catch here is that they did not mention the role of in a way neoliberal state or different mechanisms through which industry was set up, and how land was in a way cleared for the developmental or industrial purpose. So that was not mentioned. And also they mentioned about environmental purpose, how indigenous land should not be touched on environmental purpose. But as we already see that how some of this has been heavily diluted because of the new kind of in a way provisions that we see. Environmental impact assessment have been diluted. There are new industrial norms have been announced. In Assam recently we had the example of this very controversial proposition which has been put on hold for the time being, that how industries will be given clearance without much certification. So Harishankar Brahma Committee finally could not, I mean, these recommendations are pending with the government, and in fact the committee apparently also was split into different kind of sections. So what was interesting here is to see is that what is interesting right here is to see is that how the indigenous, the importance of indigenous definition of indigenous or indigenous rights was in fact played up by the government itself, and the government was in a way conscious that they want to be seen as a government that tries to talk about indigenous rights and protects indigenous rights, although at the same time it was facilitating certain acts and certain provisions which would very much go against the very fundamental norms of those indigenous politics and indigenous imagination. So there was a contradiction in place there, which we can say a strategy of, we can say, inclusion exclusion strategy. At one way the government was seen to be inclusive, at the same time doing certain activities which was very exclusionary for the indigenous people. Because this is where we have to make a distinction between Northeast India and the rest of the country, because we see that for Northeast India, the issue of land and identity and land was so fundamentally connected at a level which is not comprehensible to many other sections of the country. For example, I can give example here that in many of the for the hill communities, in many of the villages, even every piece of rock in the villages, every big rock or boulder would have a name. It would have a place in their social life world. It will have some place in their folk tales, in their stories, in the way they understand it. It's part of their memory. part of the memory as well as lived reality. So how even a rock can be part of someone's lived reality, that is not comprehensible to many other societies. So that level of attachment between the society and their natural landscape is something that needs to be asserted, that is something that needs to be told. Because if you just like think of a place just as a piece of land or a landscape, and then you open it up for any groups to come and settle, and this is the crucial link. These are the cultural sensitivities. These are the special significance that is actually missed out. So uh, that is something that we have to keep in mind, that why this politics or opposition to CAA is linked to an ongoing discourse of indigenous rights. That in a way in Assam now, I remember in 70s there was this clarion call that in Assamese we said test below tell me do. That means we will give blood but not our oil. So resource was always a fundamental part of one's identity, and this time in anti-CAA movement also we have seen that how actually those old claims and contestations over resources have come back. Although ostensibly it was just about religion and how rest of India looked at it, that it is a attack on secularism. So ostensibly it was on that, but people in Northeast, societies in Northeast, they saw it the larger picture and they tried to relate it vis-a-vis their ongoing struggle of indigenous rights. That how there is this issue of resources. There was always this issue that we are being deprived, this relative deprivation kind of a theory that was there, and how this resource was connected very crucially with one's linguistic sensibilities and cultural sensibilities, how it was already going through a turmoil, and then you have this additional kind of a provision that came up. Now here, people might ask that what about the exemptions? Because we know that CAA finally have exempted the 6 schedule areas from its ambit. And 6th schedule, as we know, is a special arrangement that is for Northeast, for the region of Northeast India. That is, in political science language, we can call it a system of asymmetrical federalism. That is, you are giving some special power to some special places. You are making a conscious imbalance. An imbalance has been created so that the larger ethos, larger design of federalism can be sustained. So 6th schedule gives some special protection. It's a protective regime. So these areas were excluded from the ambit of CAA. And interestingly, it was done only after protest and after a lot of mobilization and claim, post facto, you can say. So it was done. So even then, I mean, you can say that a lot of people are not convinced. There are a lot of apprehension and anxiety that remains on some grounds. Number one is that, of course, it has led to a further kind of agitation and further sense of victimhood on those people who are not covered by these protective regimes, and the rest of other parts of Northeast who are not protected by this protective regime. That includes even urban areas in otherwise protected areas. For example, cities like Shillong, which is otherwise in ILP, but some area, but the urban areas are not. So those whole complex kind of a binary, ILP, non-ILP, 6th schedule, non-6th schedule. So that was again further exposed, and that was in a way that was further the tension further increased. Then the other binary, that in a way that tribal, non-tribal, that was further exploited by this, because then there was this whole there was a whole impression that was made that the tribal population will be protected, but the other people, so-called non-tribals, they will be in a way left to face the consequences of this bill. So this traditional binaries, which is colonial binaries, were further kind of given a new lease of innovative, and a new tension was introduced. And what we have also seen is that even the upland tribal states, they were not at all convinced, because they could see that if, as long as the neighboring states, the neighboring plains are left open for further migration, or left open for new kind of norms of citizenship, there is no guarantee that eventually people will not find a way to come into their so-called protected areas, because because the examples are there, how people have seen how ILP have in a way failed to a large extent, and how there are different regimes through which infiltration continues. So that was not a very convincing kind of in a way. Those measures were not very convincing in that way. And these are points that we can discuss more in discussion. So, so finally, if I come to some concluding points, is that how do we understand? Of course, at one way, CAA has united Northeast with other parts of India in terms of opposition, in terms of opposing movements. There are lots of exchange between civil society groups from mainland India, although I don't like to want to use the term, but for a want of a better term, from other parts of India, let's say, there were civil society delegations and people wanted to understand the problems here. But we have seen that many a times there was, in a way, faulty conceptualization, you can say, or generalization when it comes to issues and anxieties and angst of Northeast India regarding CA and the rest of India. That a lot of the time people also clubbed NRC and CAA, and they said that they could not understand that how certain people who are largely okay with NRC can be opposed to CAA. That was a very crucial distinction that needs an understanding of the society and politics of Northeast India. That a lot of the social groups in the region who have been campaigning, we can say, or working from a free and fair NRC. And those people, of course, are very uneasy or not happy with the detention centers. Now, detention center is a different chapter, but largely with the main claims of NRC, because indigenous claims and anxieties are same when it comes to issues of NRC and the issues of CAA. That primary issue is with the outsider or the other. The religious affiliation of the other was secondary. Whether the outsider or the other is a Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, Parsi, Jew, that was seen more of a secondary issue. But the primary issue was that people are uneasy sharing the resources as well as their linguistic or cultural traits, which they think are very fragile and which they were not easy to share with. So that is why same people who thought that NRC will, in a way, put a full stop, they will, of this ongoing decade-long issue, that where the anxieties about loss of land, loss of identity, loss of language, the NRC might, in a way, contribute to some sort of resolution to that. Same people were not okay with CAA also as a new amendment of citizenship provisions. Whereas in other parts of India, we see that there was a tendency to paint the same in a broad brush, that if you are NRC is something very in a way inhuman or you can say anti-minority, anti-Muslim. So is CAA, which is anti-Muslim and inhuman. So they are both seen in the same light. Whereas in the indigenous kind of understanding or viewpoint from Northeast India and the claims and conversations from Northeast India, the understanding was little different. So this is the broad pictures that broad position that I shared with you, that how there is a need to understand how indigeneity is something that has been ongoing from a long time. One has to understand it
put on
in
mine,
the,
but I cannot see myself.
it has to be understood in the within the unfolding narratives within which Northeast India as a normative category, Northeast India as a policy framework, Northeast India as a geopolitical zone has to be understood. And CAA is, of course, a very specific point around which a lot of these anxieties have come into the fore. But CAA was not the first time where these anxieties have been expressed. They have been expressed through different means, as I gave Assam movement as an example, but I did not have time to go into the examples of all the militant movements, or you can say movements for insurgent movements, or differently explained movement for national self-determination, etc. So that was also the outcome, or you can say consequences of this type of sensibilities or this type of understanding. So CAS actually has been one defining moment where a lot of these things have come together. And what one needs to understand is this distinction when it comes to Northeast India, how the society have responded to CAA, how is it different from the other parts of India. And still, I mean, it's unfolding. It's in court now. As recent as May 2nd or May 21st, there was a petition that was again deferred in a way, I mean, rejected by Supreme Court of India, that had talked about CAA as invalid as it contradicts Assam record. But Supreme Court was not convinced with that line of argument. But there are still a lot of other petitions pending in the court. So this whole debate is still unfolding. So I'll stop it here as of now, and let's see. I mean, we can take it further in questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kaustabh. As you yourself said, that CAA is a very defining moment, and you have really delved very deep into it. And the comments which have come from the participants are very informative, very knowledgeable, excellent, very fruitful, very effective, impressive presentation, great session. So these are the feedback which our participants are giving to you. Congratulations for taking on the topic so well. If you don't mind, also in the panel, we have got Dr. Phyobenthung, who was the resource person for the previous session, from Fazl College, Mokokchung, Nagaland, and also Father Dr. Melvin Pereira from Northeastern Social Research Center, Guwahati. They are also in the panel. Before we take on to the questions of the participants, maybe we could just, since everyone has got an opinion to say on this topic, maybe perhaps if Dr. Phyobenthung is still online, Dr. Phyobenthung? I think I don't see him on the line. Okay. Father Melvin, are you on the line? Father Melvin?
Yes, I'm online. I don't think you can hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Yes, something is wrong with my video. I have nothing much to say.
Yes, Father.
But appreciate the presentation of Kaustabh. It was fantastic. I think it's given a large perspective for us to understand this issue. It cannot be taken just in isolation. I think the larger perspective that Kaustabh has given is something which was very important. I think that has clarified whatever doubts I have. Definitely they are clarified. Thank you, Kaustabh. I think let's go ahead with I would say, go for the interactive session.
Thank you, Father Melvin, for your appreciation of what Dr. Kaustabh has done. And now we shall move forward to the questions which the participants have asked. I will read the question direct as they have put without giving my interpretation, because everyone has got their own opinion. So I will respect what they have written. And I go to the first question, which says, it is from Mirdugunjan Deka.
Yeah.
He says, sir, is the CAA one more strategy by the Indian Union to coercively assimilate the Northeast into the Mediterranean culture of Indian mainland?
Okay. All right. I mean, yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. I mean, it is an interesting line of argument. I mean, that has been there. Again, to answer this question, I would like to quickly go back to 60s and 70s. And as we know that we have seen this whole apprehension that of forceful assimilation that has been there as a driving force of a lot of social movements in the region, to the extent that we have seen that there's a split in 70s. In the case of Assam especially, there was a split, one section which actually thinks that it was nothing but a forceful assimilation. Different, not only, I'm not talking about CAA per se as of now, I'm talking about different provisions, different amendments, different constitutional provisions are nothing but a means of forceful assimilations. Those are the sections that have actually started talking about larger rights, our resources to the extent of sovereignty and self-determination. So that line of argument have taken to that place, that parameter. Whereas, of course, there are those also who would see that negotiation is possible and there is some kind of a balance that can be in a way organized. Although I would like to, between these two positions, I would like to see a third position, which is something that in the language of social science we call as contentious politics. And people like, Sidney Tarot and Charles Tilly, they talk about this politics called contentious politics. That is where it is an art of negotiations between different sides. State and non-state actors, they negotiate for a shared space. And in this, actually, the claims of the past and the situation of the present, they get very intermixed, and it is a very complex kind of scenario where no one is, you can say, no one has the upper hand and no one has the lower hand. So it is how they inform each other. They inform each other's politics. So if you look at this contentious politics kind of a situation in Northeast India, we have seen that how, of course, this may be true to some extent, the question that Vidhu Gunjan has asked. I mean, of course, that apprehension or that it might have some legitimacy, that maybe it has that element of assimilation, that it has an element that majoritarianism might be imposed from above. But also what we have seen in Northeast India is that the responses to these different attempts, that how the society also comes up with their own responses. And that's how the institution and non-institution, the boundaries often get, in a way, I can say, that gets intermixed. Assam movement was an example of that, how students have formed the government, have entered mainstream politics. Of course, that can be interpreted in different way, whether they are co-opted into mainstream politics or whether they brought some new elements from outside and went to, from outside they went to inside. So this constant kind of negotiation keeps, unfolding. And the CAA also, as I told you, that has given us a defining moment where a lot of these concerns, especially about resources, indigenous rights, they were, in a way, you can see over the last few years, there was a situation where maybe they were slowly going into the, you can say, periphery and other issues of religious polarization, the very narrow definition of quote-unquote Bangladeshi. So those were the popular category that were dominating the political parlance. But CAA, although it might be attempted majoritarian coercion, even has given again an opportunity for people to bring back this language of resources, language of indigenous rights, and it has ended up becoming some kind of unified forum. So that's how I would say that it is not very easy to paint it in a very linear kind of a light, but it presents us with different opportunities or different occasions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Though all this while you have been expressing your opinion or you have taken the topic, but here looks like Krishna Jyoti Sharma, who wants to know what is your view that Indian Citizenship Act will achieve? What in your view will this Indian Citizenship Act, what will it achieve? Looks like he wants to know a personal opinion of yours.
Yeah. No, I'm not even, I mean, if you ask me personally, I'm still hopeful that the judiciary will take a, in a way, revised opinion or balanced opinion.
Okay.
And how in Northeast we have seen some areas have been exempted, and this exemption perhaps will be expanded, and this exemption will be made over a larger areas of Northeast, because otherwise, I mean, since he's asking my view, because already technically it is already very much open. What is the object? What is the object of this act? What it seeks to achieve? But if you ask me personally, what I think it will achieve is that I'm not talking about achievement yet, because I'm still hoping that there are these petitions that are pending in the Supreme Court, and the court will take it in a different way.
Okay. In your talk, you mentioned about the 6th schedule areas. Yeah. There is one question on 6th schedule area, and it is by one Jogen Boro. He says, CAA is not being implemented in the 6th schedule areas of Northeast India. But what about non-6 scheduled areas like Rahbahasong Autonomous Council, where tribal people are majority?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. Thank you for the question, because this is precisely what I was mentioning. Because what they have done, what the official position is, they have in a way activated this old divide, these binaries, and it has incentivized a politics of conflict. And this is, I think, this whole concept of incentivizing politics of conflict is a concept. If I'm right at this point, there's a scholar called Bethany Lassina who talks about, who looks into specifically into autonomous councils and the politics of autonomous councils. And she talks about how it is actually at the root of it is that how government is consciously incentivizing this conflict between people, that if somebody is seen to achieve something to 6 schedule, other groups also would start demanding that we also want 6 schedule. So it will be a never-ending cycle of conflict, demands and counter demands. So this is precisely was my apprehension, and as the person asking question rightly points out, that that apprehension is there. There are, in fact, even when it comes to Boros also, there are big number of Boro population outside the boundaries of Boroland. The present boundary of Boroland, there are tribal balls and tribal population outside. So what about those, the rights of those people? And here actually I can relate again to the Harishankar Brahma committee. The Harishankar Brahma committee that I mentioned, that was formed by the BJP government in Assam, Sabaranda Sonal government, to look into the definition of indigenous and the protection. They talk about the tribal belt and blocks. And they say that there should be a provision where it should be strictly implemented. But of course, the credibility is low, because what we have seen is that the existing tribal belt and block of Assam under Chapter 10 of the Land Ordinance have been heavily kind of eroded. It have been heavily encroached upon. So that credibility of the government when it talks about protecting tribal belt and block is in a way already low. So that way, of course, there is this apprehension that this act will completely, they will be completely left unprotected. Even though the people within 6 schedule also are not feeling protected, because they are thinking, because if you talk about the cartography or the geographical location, it sounds very impractical that if you're surrounded by, you're swamped by a new set of migration, then it will be difficult to, in a way, kind of keep yourself protected given the existing history and the existing kind of examples that we have. So of course, that is that question he's asking is the very much, that is the apprehension, and that is why a lot of this group of people who are coming together under the banner of their tribal identity, or they are finding a common ground with other groups under the flank, under the frame of indigeneity, that we also demand similar protection as the protected areas. So that is the demand that is there.
Okay. Then one question which is to the very fundamental of the topic, that is on indigenous people. And the question is by one Arpita Das. The question is, what is your view regarding Ahoms? Or before that, it says, sir, you talked about indigenous people. Could you kindly highlight who are the indigenous people of Assam? And it carries on to say, in your view regarding Ahoms, can they be considered as indigenous people? Very fundamental, like basic question they are being asked.
Yeah, I mean, that is why I was very careful in the beginning to point out that it is, of course, there is no final and settled definition. There is no final and settled definition of who is indigenous, who is not indigenous. Yes. As I told you, indigeneity is about a new way of doing politics also, and it is about a status, about how you connect to territory, how you connect to culture, how you connect to issues of land, etc. So, having said that, if we look at some of the common parameters given by organizations like United Nations, organizations like ILO, and other agencies, there are, I'm just repeating myself here because I mentioned it already, yes. But quickly, I mean, we have seen that one, of course, was that people's origin, whether they have inhabited the land in the time of colonization or conquest by foreign power, whether they were already there. Second was with a distinctive culture, then they, and new understanding is that a new emergence of indigeneity, especially in groups like United Nations Working Group on Indigenous Population, which is in fact a very effective group, and lot of the Northeast organizations are part of that, even WPG. UNWPG is that they are talking about how far you can, in a dignified way, you can relate to your natural landscape, whether you can command your natural resources. So ecology is also part of indigeneity. So in that way, of course, if you see homes in Assam, I mean, I think they fulfill most of the criteria. And in a way, that's why I'm saying it depends on which definition you take. And in the case of Assam, Harishankar Brahma Committee, of course, it is not yet accepted. I mean, it was not officially placed by the government of Assam, but what is available in the public domain, if we see, it has come out again with some criteria. One is that it has talked about a person has to be a descendant of someone who speaks one of the languages, who is local to this region. So it directly places, apart from the other two things I told you already about colonization, that those people have to be already living in the place prior to colonization. And the other thing I talked about, the distinctive culture or distinctive norms, they have to have cultural traits, they have to have. One thing they are very specifically trying to mention is that he or she has to be from a linguistic family, that they should speak a language which belongs to this region. And if they are from a linguistic group which are also there outside the region, then they might not qualify to be indigenous. So these are very controversial and sensitive topics, and government will have a difficult time, I'm sure, to adapt this, because it will open up a box, Pandora's box. But at this time, as we see that indigenous or indigeneity is something is become very loose. It is one of those definitions that has been used widely. Just like ethnic, if you define ethnicity, it's very difficult to define ethnicity. What is ethnicity and what is not ethnicity? So like this, indigenous, the term, the way it is existing in the international forums or international jurisprudence, is slightly different than the way it of late in last few years, the way it has been used in Northeast India. That we are using it in a very broad sense, in a very loose sense, and a large number of people are now coming into the grips of indigeneity. But if I go by UN definition and ILO definition, especially the issue of issue of belonging to the land prior to colonization or prior to conquest, I think Ahoms definitely also fall within the bracket. But again, that depends on your interpretation of history. So as you know, these are interpretation that comes from different angles. So end of the day, I will say it is also a political claim. And as political claims are always contested. It always has so many different takes. So it is something open for interpretation.
Okay, there are another 3-4 questions very much related to indigenous and people of indigenous nature, but I'm just skipping them over because I think answers are more or less already covered, and also because there are other questions. There is one, if you would like to say further, and it says, isn't the term indigenous itself is exclusionary term, which could hamper the overall development of a particular region, India in general and Northeast in particular? So the term itself, is it not exclusionary?
Okay. Yeah, that again is a interesting question, because it depends. I mean, how do you define exclusion? Because the very emergence of these terms, like indigenous, like you can say person of color or Dalit. I mean, these are identities that have emerged. These are assertions that have emerged within a historical context. So that is why it is so important to understand the historical context, or that is why you have to historicize. So to say, you have to historicize these terms. If we use it in an abstract, if we use these terms in an abstract manner, we lose the relevance, and then of course it becomes a tool of manipulation and tool of exploitation. And as the person poses the question, it of course becomes a tool that can be used to break a movement or disempower people. But that is why it's so crucial that we understand the particular context, how it emerges, and how it has a relevance in the lived reality of the people. So history and the continuation of history into the lived reality. History is not something divorced from our reality. When we talk about history, we should not look at it in textbook or look backwards into the years left behind, but how history overlaps into our present reality or lived reality. So that has to be understood, and how that is why I would emphasize that the way indigenous rights and indigenous discourse has emerged in the rest of the world or many parts of the world, how it is different than Northeast India. There is a tendency in Northeast India that we have taken it very loosely also at some point. And that actually might, I agree that might make it a term of, in a way, very wide prevalence, and it might exclude people. But if you understand the relevance of the term historically, as I gave you the example that indigenousness does have certain claims which is specific to that place. As I gave you the example of the villages of the hill tribes, where you have attachment to every piece of rock, that how folktale and folk narratives are part of a lived reality. Those are issues of indigenous rights, and that needs to be understood in their own light. And if say that those cannot be, in a way, that should not, their issues should be seen as same as other people, then we will, in a way, deny them some relevance, deny them the relevance of their specific struggle. But so that is why I agree that when we say somebody is indigenous, it should not, in a way, come at the cost of the rights or the cost of the valid, in a way, concerns of other groups. So naturally that question comes, if you say indigenous, then naturally the question comes, who are non-indigenous? So of course this is a very, in a way, double-edged sword, you can say. So but at the same time, we have to understand that there are communities which are very marginal. They have a sense of being marginalized, and they have a history of their whole, in a way, contact or their whole incorporation with the structure of nation state itself is through, as I told you, 2-3 very difficult tropes. I talked about the culture, how it has been seen as obscure, how Northeast was seen as this very far, far away land, exotic land, enchanted kind of land, which was seen as a very, either as a very exotic place or either as a very violent place. So this extreme understanding of Northeast was there. Then I discussed that how everything is seen through security-centric lens. Everything is about security, that it is a geopolitical zone, that every decision of the government, and we have seen even state government is often bypassed by the ministries, central ministries, because of security reasons. So security has been another way. And third is that everything is about development, that now, right now, people must be reading this whole news about this underwater tunnel in Brahmaputra that is being proposed, and then it's all over the media, the underwater tunnel in Brahmaputra. Then there are a lot of at local level, there are a lot of amusement that people are like, first of all, we are not being able to maintain our roads, and flood is happening. So what is the need of that? Second is that the issue of environmental impact, whether there was any assessment done about environmental impact. But we have seen that the overarching, again here also, the overarching issue was security. So it is done in the name of security, that, you need troop movement. So Northeast has been development, security, cultural obscurity, all of this have defined the region. So when we talk about indigenous claims, indigenous rights, you have to understand how certain people, certain societies have been feeling that their anxieties and their concerns have not been understood or heard. And that is how the indigenous, the discourse of indigeneity, that is how it has emerged. But it should not be placed at the cost of certain other groups. But that should not deny that there are different group of people in the Northeast. There are people, those who have come from other places, have settled down here. They have, of course, they have become of this place. They are accepted, they are assimilated to this land. But they cannot, they might not still be indigenous because they have other social capital, cultural capital. They might identify with other places also. I will just end with one small example of, I'm not saying this is the final example or definition. I also don't fully agree with the definition, but I think it has a point. It was by one Assamese author in 1962 Chinese War, when the war with China happened. Then again, this question had come: who is an Assamese or who is an indigenous? So this guy had said a very interesting line. He just said one line to say. He said, forget about all things about language, identity, culture, religion. He said, those people who, whenever there's a crisis like this, an invasion of enemy or whatever it is, whenever there's a crisis situation, those people who have a option or a backup place to run away, and the ones who are condemned to stay here, they are indigenous, and those who have the option to go away, they have another place. They are not indigenous. So he was indirectly referring to people from outside who always have a place to go back, right? So I mean, there are so many complex dynamics, but I think indigenous do have a valid, it has a valid position, valid place. At the same time, it should not be a option or tool for exploitation of other people.
Okay, okay. Thank you for this elaborate explanation. Here is a very common man's question, which everybody wants to know, and that is, why did CAA start in Assam?
Why did, sorry?
Why did CAA start in Assam?
Oh, and you mean the anti-CAA?
Yeah, because even the bill was introduced because of Assam, correct? Even the CAB, it came because of the Assam issue after the NRC was. Hello, doctor, are you in line? Hello, I think we have lost him. Hello, Kaustabh, hello, hello, hello. Hello. Father Melvin, are you there? Hello. I think we have lost Dr. Kaustabh. Hello.
Can you hear? I'm back.
Okay. Yes, we had lost you for a few seconds. The question, I'm reading the question as it is.
I heard the question. Yeah.
Why CAA started from Assam state only? That is the direct. That is how the questioner has put it.
Yeah. I mean, of course, it is a valid question, because, as I said, one reason is that Assam has been you can say, the field of experiment when it comes to citizenship norms. I mean, starting from that, I give you the example of 1986 amendment and section 6A. That was also specifically in the case of Assam, but it gave a whole new element to citizenship debates and discourse. And this came to Assam, perhaps NRC was again a pilot exercise. That was in the case of Assam, and now they were claims, counterclaims. Initially, the government said that it will be extended, and because of opposition, the government backtracked. They said no, there is no option plans. Still, there is a lot of confusion, but definitely, so Assam has always been any kind of pilot exercise about citizenship norms. Assam was always one of the first states. But in another way to look at this question is also that Assam is also, and Northeast for that matter, especially Assam is also been the last land frontier of South Asia. That is where the South Asia ends and Southeast Asia begins. So Assam have been facing these waves of migration, and it has a lot of this. That's why migration has been a big factor, volatile factor of all the social mobilizations. So that way is also, I mean, this type of law. Naturally, I mean, of course, that question the CAA did not. I mean, that was not that Assam was not the. It was not implemented. It was implemented as a central law. It was not
law, yes.
But of course,
but originated from Assam.
But the opposition, because Assam already was engaging with these issues for some time. So I mean, naturally, I think that sensitivity that they could connect it, that this can have this type of way consequences, and that's why I was saying the opposition from Assam started on a separate note, and where rest of India this mobilization happened, they connected through a different route. They brought the angle of secularism and threat to minorities, and then, but Assam already the mobilization was there, but more for the issue of identity and for the issue of resources. So both things got combined.
In fact, there is another question you related to the other parts of India, and the question was asking, why is CAA opposition not so strong in other parts of India? But I think now it has picked up in rest of the India. Would you like to comment more on that?
True. As in, I mean, it was strong in, it was one of the first instances, I think, when such a big nationwide opposition and movement. After long, people saw countrywide mobilization that way. But it's true also that some of the parts initially it was very urban centric. You saw it in certain cities and certain pockets, but
Yes.
out here in Northeast it has actually penetrated to different pockets, and this type of massive curfews given across states and deployment of paramilitary, which was in a way not new to this region. This region has experienced it many times. This was new for many cities. For example, heart of Delhi, that also South Delhi, the posh colonies of South Delhi, police, military, CRPF being deployed and buses being set to fire. So that conflict zones have entered the cities of India this time. So I think CAA, I would say the nature of opposition, the grounds of oppositions were different, but I think CAA opposition was equally strong, not equally, but quite
strong.
predominantly strong in many other parts.
Of the country. That's true. Yes, it later picked it up. Yes. There is one question on CAA and IPL. The question is, what will be the impact of CAA on IPL?
It should be ILP, I think.
ILP, correct. ILP applicable states.
Yeah.
Correct. ILP.
Yeah, that's what, because again, it was linked. You see, that's how the state also at times is, the state crafted also sometimes very shrewd, and they also play their cards very carefully. So they linked this CAA thing with demands of ILP that certain states were having.
Yes.
For example, Manipur was having the demand for some time that they need ILP extended.
Meghalaya
also. So this was timed in a way that as a concession or as a response to the concerns and grievances of people of these places, it was said that ILP will be extended. But if you see examples of Mizoram, for example, Mizoram has been having ILP for long. But Mizoram is one state where the movement against CAA was pretty strong. The mobilization by powerful groups like YMA and others, and ZMP, all the youth groups including the church organizations in Mizoram, they took a very strong positions about not at all being okay with CAA, despite it being covered by ILP. So that, as I would say, that ILP, of course, at one level it gives a generalized protection, but ILP is just an issue about permit of entry. ILP does not talk about citizenship, so we should not confuse ILP with citizenship norms. So ILP is just about a receipt or a record of someone entering or not entering, on what grounds someone will be allowed to be entered or not. So if someone becomes Indian citizen tomorrow, so just on the same ground as today, whoever can enter, whoever is allowed or not allowed to enter those ILP states will be the same, that same scenario will continue. So it in a way actually does not give them these states any guarantee. It does not change the scenario for them. It does not specifically mention that whether they are taking a position on new norms of citizenship or not. So whereas people are not happy with the current status of ILP protection, so that unhappiness will continue. And if you ask a lot of people in these societies, they think that if you actually see the social composition, they say that ILP or no ILP, that migration have been trickling in. There's a trickle-in effect. And that is direct effect, but there'll be indirect effect also. Indirect effect in terms of economy, in terms of prevalence of cheap labor and all that. So ILP has not completely been a factor that has assured the people of these regions or these states that they are now completely okay with this act because they have ILP.
Thank you, Doctor. As you explained to us, there are more and more questions pouring in, and our question and answer boxes are already getting overloaded. And we are already at 11:12 now, and our valedictory function is at 11:50, 1:50. Quarter past is our valedictory function. Sure. And now it is already 1:12. So I will ask you the last question, and we apologize to the participants that we are not able to discuss all the questions they have raised in this session. Yeah. And this looks like to be the what next? What next to do? And the question says, sir, it is well known that people of Assam made sincere effort to stop CAB, but everything went into vain. Now the question is that how the indigenous identity can be protected even after implementation of CAA in Assam and Northeast India in general. So it looks like what to do next. Now that the CAB has become CAA, now what to do next?
I think this is a befitting final
question.
because that gives me an opportunity to summarize and sum up a lot of the points I mentioned. And here again, I would like to go back maybe to the first question of the session, which talked about whether it is an attempt at, in a way, forceful assimilation and all that. See, I mean, whether, because it has become an act now, although of course it is pending now at the, I mean, judicial department, that whether they want to make some further modification or they, whether what position they will take is yet to be seen, because there are a lot of petitions pending. That is one part of it. But another part of it is it has also now brought back the issue of larger federal rights. That is one very important aspect, that people have understood that, you know, where small states, which does not have enough say in the parliamentary proceedings, parliamentary matters, have to now figure out ways how they can influence the proceedings of the parliament itself. And so one has to figure out ways in which one can also influence decision making and policy making, because otherwise the concerns of the small states will be forever in a way sidelined or marginalized. So that has to be figured out, how one has to influence in at the policy making itself. And then also through, I mean, as the question also asked about which are the ways in which indigenous identities can be protected and given safeguards to, that there are different ways how the state governments have to devise additional safeguards and ways. For example, the committee that we talked about, the formed by Assam government, I mean, of course, I'm not saying that I'm completely support the recommendations or not, but I'm saying those type of committees and those type of kind of solutions at the local level, some special safeguards at the local level have to be devised, through which a sensible, pragmatic, at the same time humanitarian understanding of what it means to be indigenous has to be devised. So power and decision making has to be decentralized to some extent, and local voices and local policy making has to be given more power to. So that is how I think people has to influence the policymakers through different ways. And of course, social movement remains relevant to that level, to that extent. Although a lot of people might say that the protest of December, January, and the last few months, a lot of people might say despite that it has become an act. But I would say that that did play an important role, because of that, of course, the government was in a way convinced to give some further modifications and further qualifications as to which areas would be exempted, which will not be exempted. It has also created a pressure kind of on judiciary. Some committees have been, coordination committees have been formed, which is now still pursuing that in the judicial forums. So these are the positive outcomes of the mobilization. So I think the issue is not yet resolved. It is far from resolved, and it has to be kept alive through different forums and different mobilizations. Thank you.
Yes, the issue is not yet resolved, and you end up with the road is not closed. It is still open and gives us a future to look forward to. Thank you very much, Dr. Kaustabh Deka, for taking a very tough topic and very elaborately and very effectively answering all the questions. Thank you very much. And now we move into the valedictory function, which will conclude the 2 days international webinar, which was conducted by Don Bosco College. And now the valedictory function will be conducted by Dr. Sheila Paul, CSJB IQAC Coordinator, Don Bosco College, Golaghat. Sister Sheila Paul.
Thank you, Father. Good afternoon, everyone. I deem it a great honor to propose a word of thanks and appreciation to everyone associated to this 2-day international webinar on politics of tribal exploitation in Northeast India, an unexplored slice of paradise, organized by the Departments of Political Science and Sociology, along with the IQAC, Don Bosco College, Golaghat, Assam, in collaboration with the Northeastern Social Research Center, Guwahati. First and foremost, I sincerely extend my thanks and congratulations to our resource persons who consented to share their precious knowledge and proficiency through their excellent presentations and interactions. Dr. Lucas P. Jacob, HOD, Department of Social Work, Assam Don Bosco University, who delivered a keynote address for this two-day international webinar. Dr. Walter Fernandez, Director, Northeastern Social Research Center, who spoke on land alienation among tribals, issues and challenges. Dr. Chandan Kumar Sharma, Department of History, Dibrugarh University, delivered his knowledge on unfolding history, journey from aboriginals to strugglers. Dr. Phyobenthung, HOD, Department of Political Science, Fazl Ali College, Mokajang, Nagaland, who spoke on shared sovereignty and Naga political process. Dr. Kaustabh Deka, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University, who delivered his session on impact of CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act, in Indigenous identity, claims and contentions. I sincerely express my thanks to all distinguished speakers who made this two-day international webinar a successful event. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Melville Pereira, Senior Research Fellow, Northeastern Social Center, and Reverend Father Bimal Lekra, Vice Principal and PRO, Don Bosco College, Golaghat, our moderators, for their professional performance to coordinate the sessions. Thank you very much, Fathers. The webinar would not have been possible without the continuous support and teamwork of the entire Don Bosco fraternity and Northeastern Social Research Center, Guwahati. I would like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Walter Fernandez, Director, Northeastern Social Research Center, for your collaboration in every way possible. I would like to express my special thanks to Dr. Jose Paleli for your continuous encouragement and guidance in every aspect and finding solutions to everything that we need. Thank you, Father. Special thanks to the Departments of Political Science and Sociology, Ms. Murgaki Goswami, HOD of Political Science, and faculty, Ms. Alangrada Thakur, HOD of Sociology, and team for the commitment and dedication in the planning and preparation of the webinar. Excellent teamwork. Thank you, everyone. I do thank Ms. Lalita Voska, Mr. Anjan Barali, Mr. Angur Protim Mahanda, and all who were behind the scene monitoring and facilitating everything needed for the successful completion of the two-day webinar. Thank you, friends. Well done. My dear participants, a good archer is not known by his arrow, but by his aim. With immense joy, I would like to thank our esteemed participants who not only attended, but also actively participated through your interactions, questions, and positive comments. Indeed, I thank and appreciate your perfect involvement in this two-day international webinar. Thank you, one and all. Hope to meet again. Stay safe, stay healthy. God bless you. Best wishes from Don Bosco College, Golaghat, Assam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sister Sheila. Here is an announcement, please. The webinar has ended, but the topic, Politics of Tribal Exploitation in Northeast India, an Explored Slice of Paradise, will continue. The